This page, blimey, it's the front cover of N64 Magazine October 97 issue. Good old days, eh? Looks like Yoshi is the star of the show. Yoinks! It's Yoshi, it shouts, promising Yoshi's story in all its glory. Seems they're pretty excited about that one. And look at this, a huge UK review for Doom 64. The hard bits made easy, they reckon. Secret levels revealed. How to kill everything. Jew. Sounds like they're really trying to sell it, eh? Massive 8-page review apparently, so they must have had a lot to say about blasting demons on the N64. Easy. Up in the corner there it says, it's Rare's Autumn Shocker, Diddy Kong Racing. And to see page 10 for more. Rare were the kings back then, weren't they? Anything they touched turned to gold, so Diddy Kong Racing was bound to be a big deal. Mr. Bond, it teases. Rare's incredible GoldenEye appears in Japan and the US. Complete review. GoldenEye? Now that was something else back then, wasn't it? Changed everything. Proper revolutionary stuff. Seems it was causing a stir even before it properly hit the UK. Down at the bottom. Plus, Japanese and US news and reviews. Always good to see what was happening over in Japan and the States. Get a peek at games before they maybe, eventually, made it over here. There are some tiny screenshots for Ganbare, Goemon, and Tetrissphere. Games we might have been hearing whispers about but probably hadn't seen much of yet. And just to top it off, Mario Kart Championship, your last chance to enter, latest times! Everyone was Mario Kart mad back then, wasn't they? Chances to prove you were the best racer in the land. Good times, all for the princely sum of £2.95, which felt like a lot of pocket money back then, mind you. This page of the magazine is the contents page, issue number 7 from October 1997. Right at the top it's got a big contents title so you can't miss it. Then there's Jonathan Davies, the editor, having a bit of a whinge about his editorial being on page 3 before, and he says he's used some advert as an excuse to move it further back. He's talking about putting Yoshi on the cover, must be for Yoshi's story I suppose, and he's wondering if people will buy a 2D game on the N64, seems a bit unsure about that. Warrant? He's going on about Diddy Kong Racing, saying it's brilliant and looks even better than Mario Kart. Apparently someone at Rare even smiled while playing it. He mentions some fella called Jess from Pizza Hut who's fast at Mario Kart, and they're doing a how-to guide for Blastcore next month. Sounds like it could be a tough one. Oh, and some woman called Shirley left a message inviting him for a meal. Bit random that. Then we get to the review section. N64 Arena. Doom 64 is in there. Apparently James sweated blood to get all the secrets for that. Sounds a bit dramatic. F1 pole position, with an official F1 badge and all that for the racing fans. War Gods, they reckon it's still rubbish on PAL, no surprises there then. GoldenEye, now that's got them buzzing, calling it a blinder and maybe even Game of the Year. Bit strong maybe? Ganbare Goemon, they just say it's very Japanese, not exactly selling it, is it? Tetrissphere? Tetris with balls. Sounds a bit odd, but could be alright. And then there's a plus section with a few smaller games, Power League 64, some Mahjong game, and ISS 64, the US version. So yeah, that's the contents of this issue basically. This page then is the contents page of an N64 mag, back in the day when they were actually worth reading. Right at the top we've got Planet 64 Inches. Sounds very exciting, doesn't it? Like some kind of futuristic Nintendo news center. They're hyping up Diddy Kong Racing at number 10, saying it's superb. Well yeah, Rare were on fire then, weren't they? Karts, hovercrafts, aeroplanes, the works. Then Lamborghini 64 at 14, must be some forgotten racer that one. News Center at 16, probably all about ECTS and Tokyo game shows, that was the big stuff back then. Coming soon at 22, always a tease, getting you hyped for games that might be rubbish when they actually came out. N64 How To starts on page 58, guides to life apparently, God knows what kind of nonsense that was. Dastardly shortcuts in Mario Kart 64 Inches at 68, everyone wanted to know those back then to beat their mates. Successfully visit a Japanese newsagent at 74, that's a bit specific isn't it? Bit of a niche article for importing games maybe. Mario Kart 64 Championship at 64, probably some readers competition. Then Yoshi's Story, at number 6 they say it's been in development for donkey's years. A bit of shade there, maybe it was taking its time coming out. How games work at 98, sounds like a behind the scenes type of thing. And then just the usual regulars, subs, tips, letters, back issues and the magazine issue number. Standard magazine stuff really. This page is all about Yoshi, our prehistoric pal, and it seems to be a first look at a new Yoshi game coming to the N64. It's called Yoshi's Story, and it's looking quite different from the usual Yoshi's Island sort of affair on the SNES, or SNES as we called it back then. There are a few screenshots dotted around. One shows Yoshi in a snowy level, facing off against a sort of red, angry-looking snowman-type character. Another shows some of those strange plant-like enemies that Yoshi games often have. These ones look a bit like they are made of jelly or something, very odd. Then there's a screen with Yoshi in a level, with lots of colourful bubbles containing fruit, which they are saying is just plain scary to try and get. Bit dramatic, aren't they? The text blurbs are quite funny. One mentions bananas to collect, monsters to vault. What more could a dinosaur want? Another one is saying that 2D platform gaming has never looked this good before. Not ever. Which is a bit strong, but I suppose at the time, on the N64, things were looking pretty swish compared to what we were used to. It's all hard-ish information from Japan apparently. So it's early days for this game then. Looks like a decent enough platformer for the N64. Very colourful and cute. Typical Yoshi really. This page is all about Yoshi's story. Looks like a preview from October 1997. Blimey, that was ages ago, wasn't it? Anyway, they've got this big blue Yoshi plastered on the right-hand side, looking a bit cheeky. The headline is, "Story has the game to himself," which is a bit of a bold claim, innit? There are a few screenshots dotted about. One shows Yoshi in a jungle setting. Proper lush-looking water effect actually, they point that out. Another screenshot shows what they call a knitted world. Seems a bit odd, but they say the whole world is like that, knitted or something. They reckon we'll pinch the effect for the cover. And there's a screenshot where Yoshi looks really tiny. They're saying maybe he's shrunk, or you can zoom in and out, which sounds a bit gimmicky to be honest. The text is talking about how hard it is to get info from Nintendo about their games, like it's some big secret operation, especially about Yoshi's story. Apparently it's due in Japan in a couple of months from then, so around December 97, and in the UK and US in February. They sound quite desperate to get some details, saying they've sent their stealthiest spies and most able agents to get the Yoshi-related data. Bit dramatic for a Yoshi game, isn't it? Still, looking back, we were all chomping at the bit for any N64 news back then. Seems like they were just as keen to get the scoop on this Yoshi game. This page is all about Yoshi's story, or Yoshi's Island 64 as they were calling it back then, for the Nintendo 64. Seems like Nintendo were keeping it all very hush-hush. Typical, eh? Apparently the plot is something daft about Yoshi's mates being locked up, and he's got to rescue them in time for a cuppa. Very Yoshi. They're making a big deal about it being sprite-based, like the old SNES Yoshi's Island, but bigger. Miyamoto reckons it's like a storybook, and even though it's 2D, they're trying to make it feel 3D with some scaling tricks. Sounds like they're really pushing the graphical side of things, trying to impress us all with how colourful and detailed it is. Apparently it's nothing like those old 2D games we're used to, even the SNES one. And no Baby Mario this time, apparently. Borinto. Then there's Max Everingham's bit, moaning about Nintendo being all secretive, but he does make a point. The N64 was meant to be all about 3D, wasn't it? But he's saying don't write off 2D games just yet, especially if they're as good as Yoshi's story is shaping up to be. He's got a funny line about camcorders and photos at the end there, bit of a random one, but I guess he's saying 2D can still look great even with all this new 3D stuff around. BD. There are a few screenshots dotted around, showing Yoshi in this bright cartoony world, throwing eggs and the like. And some random speech bubbles from Yoshi being a bit silly, wondering if his shoes are smart, or if something is a kippatai. Classic Games Magazine humor. This page takes a look at the upcoming Yoshi's story on the N64. Looks quite interesting actually. It's all about this new 2D scrolling Yoshi game, and apparently Nintendo are really pushing the boat out on the graphics, saying it's a big step up from the Super Famicom, or SNES as we called it. They're banging on about 6 different coloured Yoshis to choose from, which sounds like a bit of alright fun, and you chuck eggs using the 3D stick, which is a bit different, isn't it? Apparently the story is now a picture book, and there's even a bonus game tucked away. They reckon Yoshi's Island is just a working title for now, so who knows what it will end up being called. There are a couple of screen grabs. One shows Yoshi near a buzzsaw, looking a bit precarious to be honest. They even joke about it being nasty if Yoshi gets chopped up. The other picture shows a wider view of a level. Looks a bit fiddly and complicated with all those spikes. There's a bit called The Developer's Story, where Max is trying to get some info out of Nintendo Japan, but they're being proper secretive and not giving much away at all. He tries asking about the game, dialogue, who's in charge, even asks to speak to Mr. Hongo but gets stonewalled at every turn. Apparently he's on his holidays anyway. Bit of a brick wall there then, Rutway. The main bit of text kind of pieces together what they know about the game, saying Miyamoto is involved, which is always a good sign. They're calling it a traditional side-scrolling platformer, but with some new twists to take advantage of the N64, not just another 3D game. It's meant to be out in Japan before Christmas, but we lot in Europe will have to wait until spring next year, probably for them to translate all the text from Japanese. Fair enough, I suppose. Borindu. Then at the bottom there's a little box with the proper facts. Japanese release in November 97, Spring 98 for Europe, it's a 128 megabits game, got 24 levels, Rumble Pack compatible, and the 6 Yoshi colors are listed as light blue, royal blue, yellow, red, green and pink. And no Baby Mario apparently. So there you go, Yoshi's Story, coming soonish. Looks like there will be more to come, next month too. This page is a look into the future of the N64, right then in '97, and it's all about Diddy Kong Racing. Fantastic! A completely new N64 game, and it's almost finished. It screams at the top, typical magazine hype, eh? There's Diddy Kong himself plastered all over the page in his little plane, looking rather pleased with himself. They're going on about how Rare, those clever chaps from Twycross, have been beavering away at this racer. Apparently, they like to keep things secret, working away in what sounds like a converted farmhouse. They're bigging up Rare quite a bit, saying they're already a prolific N64 developer. You know, after Blast Corps and Killer Instinct on the SNES, and of course GoldenEye 007, which everyone was banging on about back then. They even mentioned Conker's Quest and Banjo-Kazooie as being on the way too. Big times for Rare then, weren't they? There are a few screenshots dotted about. One shows Diddy racing on a beach track with palm trees, looks a bit tropical. Another one's got a clock character, looks a bit odd, and another shows some characters lined up for player select. You've got your usual suspects, Diddy obviously, but also Banjo, Conker, some sort of badger fella, and a tiger. It mentions that all courses can be raced with 3 vehicles, and time trials with TT, which sounds like time trial mode. They're even comparing the water effects to Wave Race, which was pretty snazzy at the time. They're saying this Diddy Kong Racing game is going to be something special, not just another Mario Kart clone, but part of the plan to change racing games forever. Bit dramatic, innit? They're listing some of Rare's old games, like Attic Attack, Night Law, Sabre Wolf from back in the Commodore and Spectrum days, and Battletoads and Donkey Kong Country on the SNES. They're really painting Rare as these gaming geniuses, aren't they? Still, they did make some cracking games back then, you have to give them that. This page is all about Diddy Kong Racing. Seems like Rare is trying to take on Mario Kart, which is a bold move. There are a few screenshots. One shows split-screen multiplayer, which was always a laugh with mates, arguing about screen cheating. Another shot has the kart racing on water, so it's not just on land it seems. The main image is of Tipped Up the Turtle in his kart. He looks a bit goofy to be honest, but that's Rare for you, innit? The text says, "Make way for Monkey Boy Mario," which is a bit cheeky, isn't it? They are really going for it. It mentions December for UK release, and November for US/Japan, so it was coming out in time for Christmas that year. They reckon power-ups are bottom left, and cutscenes are good too. Standard stuff really. Planet 64 future look it says up top, so they must be previewing games that are coming soon. Looks like N64 Mag issue 11. Good times. This page in N64 Magazine, right? It's having a good old chinwag about Diddy Kong Racing. Seems like they reckon it might actually be alright, which, let's be honest, for a kart racer back then, wasn't always a given after Mario Kart 64 set the bar pretty high. The page is splashed with screenshots, showing off the game's look. They are proper impressed with the graphics, saying it's setting new standards and all that. To be fair, even looking at these little pictures now, it does look quite colourful and detailed, doesn't it? They are banging on about detail and clarity, which is magazine speak for, it doesn't look like a blurry mess. They're talking about how most racing games in single player are a bit pants, and Diddy Kong Racing is trying to fix that by nicking ideas from adventure games. Apparently you're in this central hub world like in Mario 64, and you go through doors to get to different tracks. You need to collect balloons, golden ones even, to unlock it all, not just winning cups like in Mario Kart. They're keen to point out it's not just 4 boring trophies. Oh no, this is different, Cheshire. Then there's the usual moan about Mario Kart power-ups being random, and the computer cheating. In Diddy Kong Racing, they're saying the computer racers don't cheat, and the power-ups are set colors in balloons, so you know what you're getting, which sounds a bit less chaotic maybe. And you can power up your power-ups, which is, well, power-upped, isn't it? Pinno. Another gripe is that racing games are too short. So Diddy Kong Racing is trying to be massive, like Mario 64 again they mention. They reckon it'll take ages to complete, with bosses to beat after each set of tracks, then harder modes and new game types after that. They're saying it's got Grand Prix and time trial modes too, all the usual stuff. 1G. The big selling point they keep coming back to is the vehicles though. Not just karts, oh no, hovercraft and aeroplanes as well. Apparently they all handle differently, and some tracks are designed specifically for each type. You can even race any track with any vehicle, which does sound like it could be a bit of a laugh, mixing it all up. Right at the end they're going on about battle modes. 4 of them, one with planes and eggs, sounds a bit bonkers, and this genie who sets challenges. Rare is saying it takes hours to even get to the first finish, And that's not even the real ending, apparently only 60% done. They promise a massive surprise at the proper end, something you've never seen before. Bit dramatic, but hey, it's magazines for you. They finish it off by saying, Rare don't mess around here at Rare. Bit of a weird flex, but alright. Sounds like they are trying to make out Diddy Kong Racing is going to be a big deal, doesn't it? This page is a look at Diddy Kong Racing, which was a pretty big deal at the time, wasn't it? Looking back at this, they're calling it a future look, which is funny now seeing as we're way past that future. It's got a breakdown of what to expect from the game, in classic N64 Magazine style. There's a little section called N64's favourite Diddy moments bits they seem to be getting excited about. Fish in the water levels, snowballs with eyes, quirky rare stuff that, pterodactyls in the dinosaur world, characters steering with one hand while reversing, and stupendous cutscenes are mentioned, which, well, they were all right for the time, weren't they? They also mention Brontosaurus fire missiles, sounds a bit mad there, and some hidden shortcuts in Dragonland. The bosses are called polygon monstrosities, better than Mario 64 apparently, bit of a bold claim there. Loads of screenshots dotted around. You've got carts racing around the tracks, some bits with planes flying through tunnels, looks like different vehicle types, which was a bit of a novelty. One bit mentions the 10 on a door, meaning you need golden balloons to get in, so collecting things was clearly a part of it. And planes being chuffing superb, very enthusiastic. Then you have these boxes breaking down the game features, 8 playable characters and secrets, Timber, Conker, Banjo, Diddy, and a few others like Bumper and Pipsy. Character modeling is polygon, obviously. 16 tracks plus secrets, with themes like prehistoric, water, snow, medieval classic kart racer themes really. 1 to 4 players, standard controls, analog steering, accelerate, brake, power slide and power up. Power-ups are missile, speed up, shield and oil drop, the usual kart racer bits, in 3 power stages. 4 camera views, all behind the racer, and battle game and bosses for each world, plus secrets. Speech samples for every character, probably mostly grunts and shouts, but they made a big deal of that stuff back then. There's a bit in the bottom right about someone from Rare demonstrating the game, James and his new camera, all very secretive about photos in the boardroom. Sounds like a typical day at Rare, from what you heard back then. They finish it by saying they'll have a full review in issue 9, subject to security clearance. Always a bit of drama with those mags. They reckon it might beat Mario Kart 64 hands down. Big words. We'll see about that, eh? October 1997, good times for the N64, looking back. This page is having a gander at Lamborghini 64, Titus's new racing game for the N64. They're banging on about the 4-player racing, saying if you've got enough controllers, it's supposed to be the bee's knees. Even if you're short on controllers, the 2 and 3-player modes are meant to be decent too. Apparently in 2-player you can split the screen either vertically or horizontally, which, back in '97, was quite a neat feature on the N64. The reviewer is a bit confused by some of the camera angles in the screenshots, and they're making a point of the nice smoke effects, followed by a bit of a sarcastic jab about driving like that. They also reckon it's got enough background eye fodder, which is a fairly backhanded compliment, meaning it looks passable I guess for the time. Trying to take on Mario Kart, are we? Everyone was back then. This page in N64 Magazine is doing a future look at Lamborghini 64 for the N64. It's quite a bold title for the page, pure Guineas a bit much really. They're previewing the game, which is from Titus, and it seems to be slated for a September '97 release in the US, with the UK release date still TBA. There are a few screenshots dotted about, showing off the in-game graphics, which, to be fair, they are making a big deal about. They're saying the graphics are comparable to Setta's Rev Limit, which was a decent-looking racer at the time. Apparently this Lamborghini game has upped the ante from 2-player split screen to 4-player, which is always a laugh with your mates, a bit like Mario Kart they mention, battling it out and being a bit cheeky to win. The review mentions it's got 6 tracks, which is apparently double what Multi Racing Championship had, and 3 times the number Rev Limit had, so they are making a point about track quantity. There's talk about pit stops, which is a bit of a novelty for console racers back then, being able to repair damage and change tyres. Game modes mentioned are Tournament, Championship, Time Trial, and something called Mysterious Secret, keeping us guessing, eh? Taurus. They also touch on the controls, saying it's been tweaked, and should be good for even demanding players. Transmission types are mentioned, automatic, semi-automatic, and manual, including the Lamborghini Diablo car, which sounds promising for car enthusiasts. Rumble Pack compatibility is in, naturally, as it's the N64, and you can save ghost data. Street date for the US is given as September 23rd, with a PAL version for us Brits to follow, and they reckon it's going to be a busy time for racing fans, what with Top Gear Rally and Rev Limit also around. They're promising a review of the US Lamborghini version in the next issue, so we'll see if it lives up to the hype then. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 7, October 1997, is having a bit of a natter about the ECTS show. Seems there was some confusion about where it was actually held. Olympia in Kensington, not the Georgia Dome as they first thought, bit of a blunder there. Anyway, the main thing is N64 games, and they're pushing this quality over quantity line, which usually means there aren't loads of games to shout about just yet. They're mentioning GoldenEye 007 and Turok as your solid first-person shooters, which is fair enough. Then there's NFL Quarterback Club 98, with a screenshot, looks alright if you're into all that American football. Nagano Winter Olympics is in there too, could be a bit of fun. GASP is flagged as a beat-em-up, and WCW vs NWO for the wrestling fans, you know the type. San Francisco Rush gets a mention, looks like a decent arcade racer from the screenshot, and Wettrix is another game they're chatting about. Space Circus, sounds a bit bonkers to be honest. Duke Nukem 64 is finally on the horizon, and they've thrown in Tonic Trouble for good measure, not too sure about that one. Apparently, we're looking at maybe 6 or 7 good games by Christmas, which is, or, key. Well, we will see. There's another screenshot for San Francisco Rush, nothing too amazing to write home about visually, but it's N64 graphics, isn't it? So, overall the N64 seems to be slowly chugging along with games, hopefully better quality stuff than the SNES days, even if we are waiting a bit longer for them. This page opens up with a bit of a head-scratcher. Right at the top left there's a section called Any Suggestions, and it shows this really weird-looking Pikachu game. Honestly, back then we were scratching our heads. It looked a bit like Pikachu gone walkabout in some psychedelic forest. Apparently Nintendo and MGM were involved, whoever they were. They called it Pikachu Genkidechu, sounds like gibberish to me, but they promised to solve the mystery next issue. Madness. Then on the right, there's a piece about a German version of Turok, called Deutschland über Allosaurus. Bit of a laugh, apparently all the bad guys have been turned into robots that go clang when you shoot them, so it's less offensive. Our hero, Turok, now says Ich bin Turok. Bit silly if you ask me, Lorok. The main article is all about ECTS, which was like the UK's answer to E3, held in London back in September. Did it give faithful Nintendo owners any decent games to look forward to though? That's the big question. Tim Weaver wrote this piece, and he mentions GoldenEye 007 being optimized for PAL, saying it'll be even better shock than before. Bit of hype there. He also mentions Diddy Kong Racing being a Mario Kart beta, and adds Blastcore and Lilac Wars to the list, then sighs. Always a bit dramatic, these magazine writers. Acclaim and Konami were showing off games that weren't playable at E3 apparently, like NFL Quarterback 98, Forsaken and Extreme G. Then there's Gex, Enter the Gecko for the PlayStation mentioned, looking nice, and apparently extra levels on the N64 version, which is good to hear, not exactly a Mario beta but still. FIFA, Road to World Cup is mentioned but sounding a bit rough around the edges, not as fluid as ISS64 apparently. Mortal Kombat Mythologies is described as not being a radical departure, but chin-scratchingly interesting. And Earthworm Jim 3 played well on PC but has camera issues. So, a mixed bag really. Konami was showing Nagano Winter Olympics, NBA in the Zone 98, and GR Applefest WCW vs NWO. Other companies had THQ with Wettrix, DMA with Silicon Valley, and GT with San Francisco Rush, Quake 64 and Duke Nukem 64. Seems like everyone was showing off a bit of everything. There's a bit called Shying Away, mentioning games that are delayed. Software Creations were talking about more N64 games, including Space Jelly, whatever that is. Game Tech's Robotech, Crystal Dreams was delayed again to March, apparently the most delayed game ever. And ISS2 is in development. Finally, there's a box on the right about Blastcore, calling it a no borders stunner, and only 50 quid. Bit sarcastic there. 50 quid was still a lot of money back then. They gave it a Star Game medal, and 88%, but only 3 out of 10 for graphics. Says it's a very tempting proposition indeed. Alright, we get it, Blastcore is good. So yeah, that's the page in a nutshell. ECTS sounded alright, some good games coming, some not so good. Typical really. This page from N64 Magazine, looking back at the Tokyo Game Show, seems a bit of a damp squib to be honest. Apparently Nintendo were keeping their powder dry for their own Shoshinkai show, so Tokyo was a bit quiet on the Big N front. There's a little section about Paul's avocado plant, bless him, still growing in a pot noodle pot, and another bit about a Tamagotchi game for the N64, which sounds like they're trying to make it a board game type thing, bit odd. Someone named Andrew from Bonnybridge won a Mario Kart 64 t-shirt, good for him, Atty. The main article talks about the show itself. Augusta Masters 98 on the N64, a golf game, was shown, apparently 70% complete. They had a go on Top Gear Rally, and while they say it's good, there's a bit of nonsense. It's great, Ed, in brackets, so maybe the reviewer wasn't totally convinced at first glance, though they did win their first race. Chameleon Twist and Dual Heroes from Hudson were also mentioned as seen it all before. Konami apparently had a beat-em-up, described as early, alongside Hyper Olympics Nagano's 64. Sonic Wings Assault for the video system has been delayed, which isn't surprising for these sorts of things. ASC2 was showing Aero Gauge, which they jokingly compare to Wipeout and Tamagotchi, which sounds a bit harsh. Ubisoft's Tonic Trouble is mentioned as looking good. There are some screenshots. One looks like Konami's Virtual On style game, Last Legion, another of Top Gear Rally, and one from Konami's beat-em-up. At the bottom there's a show stats bit, breaking down the platform and game category presence at the show. PlayStation had the biggest presence, then Sega Saturn, then N64, and Game Boy was quite low. Simulation was the biggest category apparently, followed by action and then adventure. All in all, sounds like a show with not too many surprises, and Nintendo weren't showing their hand much, saving it for later. Fair enough, I suppose. This page in N64 Magazine is having a bit of a retro moment, focusing on Donkey Kong, bless him. It's called Retro World, which is a bit poncy, but there you go. It's going back to when high scores were everything, and you could see your cheese and onion crisps through the packet. The article starts off in a slightly dramatic way, saying if you met Donkey Kong you'd feel cheated, after spending all your pocket money on the arcade game back in the day. Apparently Donkey Kong did more for Nintendo than even Mario, which is a bit of a claim. It mentions Shigeru Miyamoto's classic coin-op game taking the industry by storm in 1981, and how it was properly addictive with decent graphics for the time. It talks about Nintendo being the first to do home versions of games with their Game & Watch series in 1982, and then Donkey Kong 2, and the color versions on consoles in '83. Seems Coleco needed a flagship title for their ColecoVision, and Nintendo's Donkey Kong license was their first choice. Apparently the Coleco version was quite close to the arcade original, and the packaging was supposedly scary with fanged Donkey Kong. They mention in the UK, Donkey Kong established a whole genre, and was all over the place on Acorn Electron and Sinclair's iX81. Eventually, Nintendo released the original games on proper cartridges. Game & Watch inventiveness apparently led to Donkey Kong 3, Donkey Kong Circus, and even Donkey Kong Hockey. In 1988, Nintendo got the rights back to release the originals on the 7800. It says Donkey Kong's popularity waned for a bit, until the Game Boy version, and then Rare brought him back with Donkey Kong Country on the SNES, which proper revitalized him. Then there's the N64 board section, which is a bit of a random collection of stuff pinned up. There's a stunning picture of Link from some Dutch bloke, a scary picture, where we're meant to guess who it is, and some cool Sailor Moon peeps, also from Holland. Someone called Matthew Ottold sent in a naughty French postcard from his holidays. Lucky sod. There are some bullet points, including a picture of an animated N64 globe from Chris Ramsbottom, a scary Mario cartoon drawn as homework by Amar Welsh, and a team picture drawn by Barry Bradford. It's suggested they all look the same, which is a bit harsh. And there's a blank space on the board for readers to send in their own junk, apparently, to 30 Monmouth Street in Bath. Right then. This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at some new racing games for the N64, calling it the Hype Cruise Control? Nope, that's far too aerofix. First game is Aero Gauge from ASC2, which apparently they saw at some show, not E3 but some smaller one in Atlanta. Sounds like they are aiming for varied tracks, with tunnels and city settings, and it's out in Japan in December. No word on a UK release yet. They list sponsors like Mitta, Fusaha, Zero Groove Rider, Gezpex and Interceptor. Bit of a mouthful, aren't they? It seems alright, but the magazine is wondering if it can really compete with the mighty F-Zero. Then there's Extreme G, from Probe and Acclaim. This one sounds more promising. They're hinting it could even beat Wipeout. That's out in November for both us and the US. They're really impressed with the graphics, calling them faces smashingly gorgeous, and the fastest, smoothest they've seen so far. So Aero Gauge seems like it could be a reasonable racer, but Extreme G is the one they're properly buzzing about. Both games are clearly aiming for that futuristic speed thing on the N64. This page in N64 Mag is having a look at a couple of future races for the console. First up is F-Zero, Nintendo's own speed demon. They reckon it's coming spring '98, or maybe summer, who knows with these things. The graphics are apparently a bit rough around the edges compared to that Wipeout game, but the reviewer seems impressed with the sense of speed and the crazy track designs, you know, loops and corkscrews and all that. They're even saying it'll have 4-player mode, which sounds like proper chaos. Warrington you. Ellie. Then there's Wipeout 64, from Psygnosis. Now this is interesting, there's rumours going around that Liverpool-based Psygnosis, who did the original Wipeout on the PlayStation, might be doing an N64 version. The mag is wondering if Nintendo themselves have approached them. They're being a bit cheeky, suggesting it would be like seeing a Donkey Kong game on the PlayStation. They reckon it would be a good move for the N64, and that other developers would jump at the chance to make it if Psygnosis don't. It's all a bit up in the air at this point, but it would be amazing to get Wipeout on the N64, wouldn't it? The next page in N64 Mag, we've got a peek at the sock shop, which is all about UEFA Soccer. Apparently licenses don't necessarily guarantee a good game, which is probably true enough. They're banging on about motion capture and real teams, saying it might be the football title to watch, we'll see. Alan Hansen, the mouthy Scot from the BBC, is even involved as a technical game advisor. Make of that what you will. They reckon it's a bit like Sega's Virtua Striker, but with proper players and stadiums, all photographed like. After FIFA using proper commentators, they seem a bit miffed they might have to settle for Brian Moore. Let's hope not. Yeah. Then there's Wheatrix, which sounds a bit bonkers. Apparently this puzzle game came about by accident. Something about building blocks, fireballs and earthquakes. Sounds properly mental. You're guiding blocks and building channels and dams and all that, proper head scratcher. They reckon it's a decent puzzle game, and it's going to be half the normal price for 64-bit games, which is not bad at all. And lastly, Argonauts are mentioned. They did the FX chip for the SNES, remember them? They're working on a couple of games, no titles yet, which are supposedly in the Star Fox vein. Apparently it's a mix of Silicon Valley weirdness with UFOs and aliens. Sounds intriguing. Might be something good there, especially coming from Argonaut. Overall, a bit of a mixed bag of footy, puzzles, and spacey weirdness on the horizon. The next page in this N64 mag is all about Mortal Kombat 4. Remember all the hype for that one? They're calling it formidable? Bit cheesy, even for then. Seems Midway, the guys behind it, are aiming for a spring '97 release in the UK for the N64, though arcade was out sooner, maybe Christmas time elsewhere. They were trying to reassure us N64 owners, after the, shall we say, less than amazing Mortal Kombat trilogy port on the N64. The article talks about the new 3D graphics polygon fighters, and 360-degree arenas, which sounded pretty swish at the time. Character-wise it's the usual suspects like Scorpion, Sub-Zero, Sonya and Raiden, plus some new faces like Quan Chi, Kai, Fujin, and this Shinnok geezer. Apparently there are secret characters too, even some from that Mythologies game, remember that weird side-scroller? The reviewer seems cautiously optimistic, saying it looks like the series is getting back on track after the N64 trilogy debacle. There are little snippets in boxes dotted around too, one mentioning weapons like clubs, mallets and crossbows, which was a new thing for MK then. Another box is musing about some monster in the game, and something about a Laughing Boy character. And yeah, they are definitely referencing how a bit rubbish MKT on the N64 was, but are hoping MK4 will be decent. Blood is still a big selling point, naturally. It all sounds promising enough, certainly got me and my mates chatting about it in school back then, wondering if it would finally be a decent MK game on the N64. The next page here is all about the upcoming Legend of Zelda 64, and blimey, weren't we all waiting for this one back then? They're calling it the biggest cart ever, which sounds about right considering they've doubled the size to a massive 256 megabits, 4 times bigger than Mario. Crikey, you could get lost in a game that size. Warrington, apparently the story goes back to Hyrule's misty past, with Ganon being a thief and Link on a quest to stop him and find the Triforce. They're even showing off screenshots, and you can see Link with his fairy companion Navi, I think they called her, and even riding a horse. Remember that? A proper horse in Zelda. Mind blown. They're making a big deal about Link's face evolving, and the world being really detailed, which, to be fair, it did look pretty impressive for the time, even in these small screenshots. The Japanese release is set for December, but typical, we're still down as TBA, over here in the UK, though they reckon February for the US. Sounds like we'll have to wait a bit longer then, but at least they're promising a playable version at Shoshinkai in November, and fingers crossed James gets a go on it for the Christmas issue. That'd be something to read over the Christmas pud, wouldn't it? This page of the magazine has an Ask Fusoya section. Seems like the wizened old gamer of N64 Magazine is holding court. There's a few questions from readers, mostly about RPGs it seems. First up, Andre from Norway is asking about Quest 64, or Holy Magic Century as they call it here. Fusoya reckons it's got nice character designs and a day-night cycle, which is fancy, and the battles are alright, but he's not sure about the story yet. Sounds cautiously optimistic, but ready to slag it off if it's pants. Then someone else is asking about Chrono Trigger 2 feet on the 64DD. Remember that add-on? Fusoya doesn't seem to know much, just jokes about little demons nibbling his slippers. Typical Fusoya. Crowd Orchestra. Then there's a question about Konami and removing music from Goemon, the mystical ninja game, to save space. Fusoya is having none of it, worrying about the translation and dodgy names, going off on one about cultural sensitivity, bit much maybe, or shay. James Kenny wants to know how long a day is in Holy Magic Century. Apparently, it's about 8 to 10 minutes in the version Fusoya played. Finally, someone called Mir from Surrey has cheekily asked if Square are ever going to make games for Nintendo again, and Fusoya is absolutely fuming, wants to cast a Meteo spell at them. Bit dramatic. Around the questions are some Zelda 64 feet screenshots. One shows a big underwater boss. They're wondering if the screen cropping is for effect, like in Star Fox. Another is Link in a dungeon, mentioning platforming, and another is Link battling, saying the moves are more complex than Mario's. There's also a shot of a lizardman enemy. They're all looking pretty good for the time, very moody lighting in Zelda, very cutting edge for 97. Fusoya is properly hyped for Zelda anyway, even if he's pretending to be all calm, reckons it's gonna be amazing, even if it is an action RPG, and not just for stat-obsessed nerds who like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. He's hoping for a pre-Christmas Japanese release, but thinks it might be a bit further off than we'd like. Sounds about right for Nintendo, always keeping us waiting. This page from N64 Magazine is blaring Grintendo at us, which is a bit much, isn't it? It's all about Nintendo's upcoming lineup for 1998. Apparently Yoshi's Island 64, or Yoshi's Story as it'll be known over here, is on the way, but no Baby Mario this time, which seems a bit odd given the title. 6 worlds, 4 stages each apparently. They are also saying it's not coming out until after Christmas in Europe, because of translation time. Bit slow on the uptake there, Nintendo. Banjo-Kazooie has also been pushed back. Typical, isn't it? They were mulling over Japanese names for it, thinking of things like Donkey Bear, or Big Adventures of Bear and Bird, which thankfully they seem to be joking about. Miyamoto's even chimed in on Banjo-Kazooie, saying the 2-player coupe is good, and that Rare are really hot stuff. Bit of a bromance going on there. Diddy Kong Racing is getting a lot of attention, with the reviewer questioning if it's going to be better than Mario Kart, which is fighting talk. They mention the 4-player mode and different vehicles for each racer, which sounds interesting. There's a screenshot of it with what looks like an ice level. Then there's a little section called An Ear to the Ground, talking about rumors. Capcom are apparently working on 4 N64 games. One's a puzzle game, already mentioned before, then a Resident Evil style adventure, a Street Fighter game, and Ghouls and Ghosts 64. Sounds like Capcom are going all in on the N64 then. They also mention Bandai are doing a Tamagotchi 64 game, saying it's like the Egg Toys but more expensive. Joy, Techless. Lastly, they talk about a Mario Kart-style snowboarding game called Snowbo Kids by Atlas. Apparently, it might not even make it to the US or Europe though, and they're looking for a publisher. They describe it as different from other snow games, with customizable characters and boards. December release penciled in, we'll see. And then, they're also teasing Multi-Racing Championship 2, and some RPG based on a Japanese TV show called Samurai Showdown, though that sounds a bit far off. Oh, and Human, who were doing wrestling games, are apparently done with the N64 entirely, which they seem quite pleased about. All in all, a busy page, with a lot of promises for the future, as always. This page in N64 Magazine, well, it's a bit of a mixed bag really. At the top we've got a piece about Hudson's bomb plot, and it's all about Baku Bomberman. Seems like Hudson are really pushing this one for the N64, saying it might even sell out. Bit ambitious, aren't they? They're going on about how good it looks in 3D and the puzzle solving, saying the bombs are impressive and destroy everything, enemies and buildings alike. They mention the enemies just wander about waiting to be blown up, which sounds a bit daft. Apparently the last Bomberman, Atomic Bomberman on PC, wasn't all that great. But good news for us old school types, the N64 version's battle mode is supposed to be like the good old SNES ones, with 4 Bomberman blokes battling on a single screen. Can't go wrong with that really, simple fun. Raritics. Then underneath that Bomberman bit, there's a section called Tokyo Culture Scene, with a picture of some girls, probably just a bit of filler to be honest. And then on the right hand side, we've got something about the Princess of Storms into scene. That's Princess Mononoke. Apparently it's done really well in Japanese cinemas, and now it's coming over here. It's a Studio Ghibli film by Hayao Miyazaki, who did things like Nozakaya and My Neighbor Totoro. Disney are even involved in distributing it outside of Japan, which is quite a big deal for an anime film back then. It's set in ancient times with talking animals and gods, something about a hero called Ashitaka on a mission and getting caught up in a war. Sounds a bit deep for a cartoon, to be honest, but Miyazaki's stuff is usually pretty good, if a bit strange sometimes. Says here, and you'll never. Well, they've left us hanging there, haven't they? Typical magazine cliffhanger. This page in N64 Magazine, right, kicks off with a bit about Gomon. Seems that cheeky blue-haired ninja fella, who's been bouncing around on teleads and the SNES for ages, is getting his own animated series. Apparently, it's going to be set in a futuristic Tokyo, 21st century and all that, with him battling some evil spiritual bloke. They say the game's getting a decent review in this issue, an 80% and a kiss from ZY, whatever that means, maybe a good score then. Then there's something daft about Pocket Monsters stamps, or Pokemon as they call them now I think. Japan Rail did this thing where you could collect stamps at subway stations in Tokyo. Collect enough and you get a certificate or a special card. Sounds like a right faff, but apparently loads of people, over 100,000 of them, were queuing up for it. Mad, isn't it? Following on from that Pokemon craze, they had a national league to find the best player. Blimey, almost 4,000 Japanese gamers battling it out across the country to see who's top dog. Apparently Nintendo reckons it's good because everyone will be playing by the same rules for once, instead of their own silly made-up ones. They're hoping to do it every year. Good luck to him, I say. Next up, it's about that Mononoke film, Princess Mononoke. This anime film is doing bonkers business over there. Apparently on opening day it drew 300,000 punters, and even a month later you're still queuing for 2 hours to get in. By August, it made an absolute fortune, making it the most successful Japanese film ever, even bigger than some penguin film they mentioned. The film poster is everywhere in Tokyo apparently. Finally, there's a bit of schadenfreude about Doom 64. Seems like the Japanese aren't too fussed about it. It only sold 2,000 copies, and then vanished from the charts in a week. They're wondering if the next Quake game on the 64 will even bother with Japan at this rate. Bit harsh, but fair enough I suppose. It wasn't exactly mind-blowing, was it? Even on the 64. The next page in this issue, we've got a bit of a travel piece called An Englishman in Tokyo, with Max Everingham. He's talking about Akihabara, which even back then was known as the place to be for games and gadgets. Apparently he's been wallpapering his bathroom with all the flyers you get handed out there, which is a bit of a laugh. Then there's a Learn Japanese bit, giving you some handy phrases if you're planning a trip and want to avoid the mini-skirted flyer girls, or maybe engage with them, depending on your preference. Phrases like arigato for thank you when accepting a flyer, and keko desu for no thanks if you're not interested. There's also morai mashita if you've already got one, and a longer one konnichiwa. Shigoto no ato de, nani o shimasu ka, which is apparently hi there. What are you doing after work? Bit cheeky that last one, trying to chat up the locals. Lastly, there's a competition to win a multi-racing championship cartridge. Someone's lost their copy, and they've put a sketch of their flat in the magazine to help readers find it. Madness. It's a top-down view showing the kitchen, balcony, bath, toilet, all the rooms, with bits of furniture marked like TV, sofa, bed, and wardrobe. You're supposed to email in where you reckon the game is. If you find it, you get to keep it. They reckon they've already checked behind the telly and sofa. Good luck to anyone trying to find that. They've even put their email address, something at tkyo.at.net. or .jp if you fancy having a go. Bon chance, as they say. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 7, takes us to the arena section, all about the reviews. Headlining here is Doom 64. Doom 64! In massive letters. 8 pages dedicated to monster stalking, with James delivering the definitive verdict. Bit much, wasn't it? Remember all the hype around Doom on the N64? Then there's War Gods, underneath, in green. We haven't, it has to be said, been waiting with bated breath for this one, they say. Slightly less enthusiastic about that then. Below that, we've got their guide to scoring. Explains how they hand out marks. Gold star for 85%, and above the Star Game Award. Then blue for 70% to 84%, top notch. Green, 50% to 69%, is perfectly playable. Red, 20% to 49%, games that are lazily programmed. And finally grey, 0% to 19%. Oh dear, they'll punish it ruthlessly. Always a bit dramatic, N64 Magazine, but you knew where you stood with them, didn't you? This page from N64 Magazine, Takes me right back. It's the import arena section, looking at games that were big in America and Japan but hadn't quite landed here yet. Right at the top it's shouting about GoldenEye 007, naturally, because everyone was buzzing for that. They're saying Rare's shooter will make Turok look prehistoric, which is a bit strong, but it was a big deal, GoldenEye. They reckon it'll be out in November, spot on actually. Then there's something called Gambare Goemon, which they say is a Konami RPG that's even eccentric for Zai. Never really took off here though, did it? Tetrisphere is next, calling it an intriguing 3D twist on the Russian classic, and Power League 64, International Superstar Soccer 64, and Django Simulation Mahjong 64 are also listed. Must have been keeping an eye on all sorts back then. Yasing. Down below there's a bit called How It Works explaining their review categories. Visuals, sounds, mastery, lifespan and verdict. Pretty standard stuff really, asking if the graphics are good, sounds are decent, if the game uses the N64 well, and if it lasts long enough for your 60 quid. Fair enough. Then it moves to Team 64, introducing their elite squad of crack Nintendo 64 testers. Bit dramatic. There are photos of Jonathan Davies, Will Overton, Tim Weaver, Paul Jarrell, James Ashton and Jess Bickham, all looking suitably concerned, or pulling faces in that 90s style. They've got quotes from them, about nightmares, relating it to the games they've been playing. Jonathan Davies apparently isn't scared of anything, particularly not girls, according to the write-up. Bit cheeky. Tim Weaver reckons he was eaten by a whale in a dream, and Paul Jarrell had a pot noodle-related nightmare. Sounds about right for the time. James Ashton dreamed about being chased by a man with a gun in Colchester. Cheerful. And Jess Bickham claims he never has nightmares anymore, something about pulling his hair out years ago. They say they made that up though, typical magazine banter. Each of them has a Game of the Month pick too. GoldenEye, Gambare Goemon, Wave Race 64, Doom 64 and Tetrisphere. Good variety there, showing what they were looking at in N64 games at the time. Yeah, decent snapshot of the N64 scene back then in late 97. This page features a review of Doom 64, which, if I remember rightly, was quite anticipated back then, especially with GoldenEye already out, and everyone hyped for first-person shooters on the N64. It looks like N64 Magazine had already reviewed a Doom game in issue 3, and they were quite keen on this one too. They're saying it's out now in the UK, and they're giving it a thorough going over, taking its pulse and all that, which is magazine speak for a proper review I suppose. Hakal. They've got these little boxes describing the monsters, which is handy. Let's see, Cyber Demon, king of the monsters apparently, most likely to soak up all your ammo like it's nothing. Pain Elemental, fires lost souls, and is most likely to fill the room with baddies and then kill you. Cheerful. Mancubus, a missile-firing fat boy, most likely to waddle unconvincingly. Demon, just a plain old ugly biting boy, most likely to hunt in packs. Lovely. Baron of Hell, described as Minotaur-esque teddy boy, most likely to jump out of a cupboard when you least expect it. And finally Nightmare Imp, purple fireballing imp cousin, most likely to appear out of nowhere and then get shot. All sounds pretty standard. Doomfare really good fun though. There's a screenshot as well, bit blurry now, but you can see an imp and some armor. £60 it was back then. Blimey, games were pricey. This page is all about Doom 64, a bit of a reimagining of the classic for the N64. They're calling it Class of 64 inches, which is a bit cheesy, but it does show off all the beasties you'll be facing. They've redrawn all the usual Hellspawn to take advantage of the N64's color, so they are looking pretty crisp, even if they are still just sprites. It's a rundown of the usual suspects, like the Lost Soul, that flaming skull that always nips at your heels, the Arachnotron, that clanking spider with a laser, and the Revenant, that bony git with heat-seeking missiles. Then you've got the Archvile, always a pain with his energy bolts, and the Big Daddy Spider Mastermind. They've got the Floating Cocoa Demon, the Hell Knight, the Imp, and the Zombie and Shotgun Zombie. Standard Doom fodder really. It's all there, described with a bit of a tongue-in-cheek tone, like the Caca Demon, dying with a strange parping farting noise. Charming. There's a little section called Missing in Action, which points out that some of the Doom 2 monsters are missing. Apparently the Heavy Metal Dude, or Heavy Weapon Dude as some call him, the fat bloke with the chain gun, isn't in this version. Shame, he was a tough nut. They reckon it might be because of cartridge size, old chestnut that, but in any case, no Heavy Metal Dude this time around. It does sound like they are saying this Doom 64 is a bit different, but still looks like it'll scratch that Doom itch. This page from N64 Magazine, it's got a breakdown of how Doom 64 works, right? Trying to make sense of the level structure. It says Doom was already complicated, and Doom 64 is even more so, with secret levels and all sorts. They've got this flowchart showing how you progress, normally going from level 1 to 4, then 12, 18 and so on. But there are secret levels like 29, 31, 30 dotted about that you can get to by finding secret areas. And if you really want to get to the end, you're aiming for level 32, the final level, to see the features menu. Then there's a bit about controls for Doom 64, saying the standard setup is not ideal, especially if you've played Doom before and are used to strafing. They're suggesting remapping the buttons, using the analog stick for movement but then the L button for left strafe, and R for right strafe, and using the D-pad if you want to move with that. A bit fiddly, but hey, we were used to it back then. Finally, there's a piece about the crazy laser weapon in Doom 64. Apparently, it's a new alien weapon and its power depends on how many switch keys you collect. Collect 1 key, it fires single laser bursts, 2 keys and it fires a straight shot, and 3 keys and you get some sort of triple spray. They say it's available from level 29, or level 4 if you missed it first time. Apparently it eats up ammo like anything, which is a bit of a pain, and they even joke that it looks a bit puny, even if the graphics are meant to be good. Typical. This page from N64 Magazine, back when N64 was the shiny new console, is a walkthrough guide, classic stuff, for Doom 64. Remember that? Still looked pretty good at the time, even if it wasn't exactly pushing the N64 to its limits graphically. It's telling you how to find level 29, Omega Outpost, which is a secret level, accessed from level 4, the holding area. They've got little maps and screenshots to guide you through it, showing you where to go and which switches to flick. Looks like a bit of a puzzle to get to level 29, involving teleporting across ledges and finding switch keys. Typical Doom really. The walkthrough is showing you how to grab the alien weapon and the first switch key. Warranta? There's a section called Gun Grins as well, which is a bit of a laugh. They're talking about the weapons in Doom 64, saying that getting ammo is harder than getting the weapons themselves, which is fair enough. They reckon the plasma rifle is the weapon of choice when things get tricky, and the BFG, well, they point out the delay when firing it, making it a bit risky against moving targets. Still, BFG in Doom, always a good time, even if it is a bit laggy. They also have a little comment about the pistol being useless, which is pretty much bang on. Shotgun and chaingun get a mention too, nothing too groundbreaking in their opinions to be honest, just standard Doom weapon talk. So yeah, a typical how-to for finding secrets in Doom 64, back in the day when magazines were your best bet for figuring this stuff out, before everyone just looked it up online. This page from N64 Magazine, yeah, flipping through this takes me right back. It's all about getting the upper hand in games, isn't it? Classic stuff. They've got a how-to guide here, showing you how to unlock level 30 and find some second switch key in Doom 64. Of course, back then we were all trying to figure these things out ourselves, weren't we? Scribbling notes and hoping for the best. But a magazine showing you the ropes, well, that was proper handy. Then there's a code killer bit, bragging about a cheat code for Doom, the original one, saying you don't need a game killer, which were those cheat devices everyone kinda wanted but were a bit pricey, weren't they? Apparently this code gives you the full cheat menu in Doom, which, let's be honest, is tempting after getting blasted by those imps for the 100th time. And look at that, a massive list of level passwords for Doom 64. If you were really stuck, or just fancied skipping ahead, these were a lifesaver. Mind you, using passwords felt a bit like cheating in itself, didn't it? Still, when you just wanted to see the next level, who's judging? Good times, good times. Makes you wonder how we ever managed without the internet telling us everything instantly. This page is all about cracking Doom 64 on the N64, specifically getting to level 31, the Void, which is a secret level apparently. It's giving a step-by-step guide, like one of those you'd pore over back in the day trying to figure out some convoluted secret. Right then, to get to level 31, you've got to be in level 18, Spawned Fear. First, you go through the yellow door, then leg it back down some steps, and stick to the left wall around a corner. Apparently there's a hidden room on the left with a sneaky exit that takes you to the elusive level 31. Sounds like a bit of a faff, but that's Doom for you, eh? Level 31 itself seems to be a right pain. They're saying clear out all the monsters before you start doing anything else. Good advice, knowing Doom. Then it's a teleporting puzzle, going from point A to B, then C, then D to grab the red key. After that you're off to point A again, then F from point E to get the yellow key at G. Sounds like a right runaround. Then, activate a switch at H after going to C and D, and apparently you've got to quickly get to D and C again, and then you go from C to E via B and A, then from E to F. Finally, from point F, where a step has risen, you can grab the final switch key at J. Blimey. Sounds more like a marathon than a level. All just to get a switch key, eh? Still, it's Doom, so worth the effort, probably. There's also a bit on circles in your mind. talking about tactics, strafe buttons, taking cover from fire. They're recommending circle strafing, which is classic Doom advice really, running around enemies while shooting to avoid getting hit. Good old circle strafing works every time, mostly, or not. Overall, it's a proper guide to unlocking a secret level in Doom 64. Takes me back, all this cryptic instructions and pixelated screenshots. Good times. This page from N64 Magazine, back in the day when we were all buzzing about the Nintendo 64, is having a look at Doom 64. It's got a section called Fun Size, talking about how weird the level progression is, like finishing level 24, bizarrely warps you straight to level 28. Apparently, even finding the secret switch keys for levels 29 to 31 doesn't let you play levels 25, 26, and 27 normally. Sounds like a right faff. They reckon the only way to see those is through the cheat menu if you're feeling brave. They're described as tiny arenas, packed with mancubuses, cyber demons, or arachnotrons lovely. And you've got to be a proper Doom god to beat them without cheating, even on normal difficulty. No hiding places and not much ammo, sounds charmingly brutal in that classic Doom way. Then there's a mother section, which is all about level 28. It's supposed to be the last level, but apparently not really, as you end up facing the mother of all demons, or Mumsy as they call her later on, with typical British humour. The advice is to grab all the coloured switch keys and deal with the monsters in the anteroom before facing her. Apparently, the laser gun is the best weapon for Mumsy, because she can't stand it, you see. Helpful tip that. They also mention that level 28 without the switch keys is much harder, which doesn't surprise me. There's a quick tip box with little hints for levels 15, 17 and 18. Level 15 is about picking up the megasphere and figuring out the pattern of appearance of the columns. Level 17 is about using teleporters and opening secret doors. And level 18 is about getting the blue key by shooting switches and quickly grabbing it from a lowered platform. Standard Doom puzzle solving, nothing too revolutionary there. Key. The main chunk of text seems to be more of a general review bit. They're saying that Doom 64's levels are mostly straightforward, but these quick tips are for bits that had them scratching their heads. The review mentions that Doom created the Doom-style shooter, and they're wondering why Doom games always appear so soon after a console comes out, like Duke Nukem on the N64 as well. It touches on Doom 64 being announced by Midway for the N64, and how it was anticipated by British gamers. They're saying it's a compulsive game. Simple, but effective. They note the darker and gloomier feel of the levels compared to PC Doom, and how the enemies have this habit of jumping out and surprising you. They talk about the level design being good and comparable to PC Doom 2, praising the new textures and floor plans, and how the new look enhances the game, keeping it gloomy and dark as Doom should be. They're concluding that despite being a known quantity, Doom 64 on the N64 is still a solid and well-done game. There are a few screenshots dotted around showing gameplay, corridors, demons, the usual Doom stuff. Overall, it's a pretty standard preview/tips page for Doom 64 in a 90s N64 mag, focusing on some of the trickier bits and giving a general thumbs up to the game. This page right then, let's have a butcher's at this. Doom 64. Final level, eh? Level 32 hectic. Sounds about right for Doom, doesn't it? They're saying cheats won't work and you'll not survive. Bit dramatic, but it is Doom. They've got little tips here for a few levels. Level 20, Breakdown. Says if you're stuck you need to climb up a pillar and hit a switch to lower a blue key column. Righto. Level 22, Burnt Offering. You're struggling for health? Stone statue in the big room. Balcony, platform, supercharged sphere. Got it. Then, level 32 Hectic itself, proper way to level 32 without cheating, is to blow up 10 barrels from level 1. Then find a secret teleporter. Sounds like a right faff, to be honest. Teleporter behind the last barrel and you're in. Apparently. Down the side here they've got a little review section for Doom 64. Visuals get a 7. Smoothly animated and darkly realistic. But the reviewer says, monsters, sadly, are crap. Harsh. Sounds get an 8. Scariest music. And monster noises are disturbing. Mastery only gets a 5. Doom 64 is slowly being left behind. Bit mean in it? They reckon it lacks innovation. Lifespan gets an 8. Reassuringly difficult, and best secret options of any Doom to date. Verdict is, second choice behind Turok at the time, and with GoldenEye knocking about it's now third. Ouch. Overall score, 77%. Not bad, not amazing. Says good game but limited. Pretty standard for a Doom game really, wasn't it? Good blast, but not exactly groundbreaking. James has signed it off at the bottom. Probably young James. they always get the fun jobs. October 1997, yeah, that rings a bell. GoldenEye was all the rage then, wasn't it? Turok was still looking pretty swish with its polygon dinos. Doom 64, yeah, it was alright, a bit darker and grittier, but maybe a bit samey compared to everything else coming out. This page from Arena Magazine, issue 7, is giving us the lowdown on F1 pole position for the N64. Apparently it crams in all 16 circuits from the 96 season, which is a fair bit of track to be getting on with. They've got some screenshots showing off Albert Park in Australia, calling it retro, a bit of a dig that is. Then Interlagos from Brazil, Buenos Aires in Argentina, and the Nürburgring in Europe, must be the proper Nürburgring they mean. Pointing out Interlagos goes anti-clockwise, like we're all daft, and that Nürburgring is usually hard to overtake on, no kidding. Apparently it's a doddle in this game though, bit of a shame if you ask me, takes the edge off, doesn't it? Standard camera views are in, behind the car is their pick, nothing groundbreaking there. And you can muck about swapping drivers and teams, if you're that way inclined. Driver list includes the usual suspects from 96, Hill, Schumacher, Irvine, Alesi, Berger, Hakkinen, Coulthard, with teams like Williams and Benetton. 60 quid it'll set you back, needs a controller pack for saves, and it's on a 64 meg cartridge, that's a chunky car for pack then, out now, so they say. This page then, is having a look at F1 pole position 64, on the N64. It's got these little boxes showing off different circuits, Imola in San Marino, which they reckon is like a twisty Monaco, Monte Carlo, proper street circuit with the tunnel, Catalunya in Spain, looks a bit samey to me, and Gilles Villeneuve in Canada with a fast bend. Wars. They're banging on about how good it looks in 3D polygons, compared to the old SNES Mode 7 stuff, saying it's streets ahead of Formula 1 on the PlayStation. Bit of fighting talk there. Apparently you can change the camera view, from in the car to floating behind it, which they think is better to see Heinz-Harald Frentzen coming up behind you. Bit cheeky that. Bellier. They mention Murray Walker and some American voiceover in the game. Seems like they're impressed with the graphics and the handling, all the usual stuff you'd expect. Talking about tweaking spoilers and tyre types. Full season races, all that. Sounds like a decent racer for the time. Not groundbreaking, but probably better than what we were used to on the 16-bit machines. Have Ubisoft managed to turn Human Grand Prix 6 from a Shinji Nakano into a Michael Schumacher? Bit of a dramatic question there, aren't they? Always trying to stir things up, these magazines. This page then, in N64 Magazine, is all about getting your motor racing game properly tuned, specifically for Formula 1 World Championship on the old N64. They're running through all the settings you can fiddle with before a race, like transmission, brakes, which they rather sniffily say is for cowards if you let the game handle it. Wing settings, steering, tyres for slicks or rain, and suspension. Each one has a bit of blurb explaining what it does, and their advice. Standard stuff really, if you wanted to shave off those vital seconds. At the top they've got little boxes for a few tracks. Magny-Cours in France, which is apparently a pain to get to in real life. Silverstone here in Blighty. Hockenheim in Germany. And the Hungaroring in Hungary, which they say is a bit of a slow third-gear slog. Just little tasters for the circuits in the game. Warrington Nog. There's a bit in the corner saying it's official about driver lineups, mentioning some names I vaguely remember, like H. Dill and D. Piniz being replaced by proper drivers, which is a bit harsh but typical magazine banter. Then there's a moan about the intro to F1 pole position being a bit rubbish compared to Human Grand Prix, reckon it's a bit boring, and they're having a dig at pole position speedo, saying it's all kilometers per hour and who knows what 168 kilometers per hour even is. They do admit Grand Prix 2 on the P&C was a bit better at giving you info on gears and corner warnings, although they reckon those corner boards in Grand Prix 2 are a bit unrealistic. All in all, a decent guide to getting the best out of your F1 racer, and probably something you actually read back then to get a leg up on your mates. This page is an article from an old N64 mag, must be around 97 or so judging by the look of it, and it's all about F1 pole position 64. Right then, let's have a butcher's. Warrington of it. It's got little boxes showing different racetracks, Spa-Francorchamps in Belgium, Monza in Italy, Estoril in Portugal, and Suzuka in Japan. Each one's got a tiny screenshot of the game looking all blocky and that, but you can sort of tell what track they're meant to be. Spa's described as half public roads and a bit dodgy to crash on, Monza's fast and scenic, Estoril's got a long straight and wiggly bits, and Suzuka's got a Figaro Fate and a Ferris wheel. Fancy that? Then there's bits about gameplay stuff like Fuel, which is about pit stop strategy, pit work, which they're a bit confused about, and controller settings. Apparently Super NES's style is buttons, and D-pad. Left uses D-pad for steering and analog stick for accelerate/brake. Bit weird that. Right is the proper analog stick setup, and steering wheel is for wheels obviously, if you were flash enough to have one of them. The right option bit is telling you to change the default Japanese settings, upping the computer level and machine touch to normal, and turning machine damage off. They reckon the default settings are a bit rubbish and make the game too easy, and you don't really feel the crashes if you leave damage on, apparently. There's also something about files, where they moan about save data being a bit rubbish and not saving your position between races, just your lap times, which caused some ructions in the office apparently. There's a bit called Shiny Clappy People, which sounds a bit odd, but it's about the crowd sounds, and how they've been improved from the SNES Grand Prix game. They're saying the sound effects are better now, with tire squealing and engine noises, and the radio voice is clearer, although still repetitive. Then they've got numbered bits, like a proper review section. Visuals they reckon looked good a few years ago, but now are just functional. Yeah, that's about right. They were never going to win any beauty contests, were they? Sounds are annoying announcer, and sound effects that don't gel. Mastery says there's nothing you can do here that you couldn't do on any other console. A bit blunt there. Lifespan is about how many circuits and difficulty settings there are, reckons it'll last for ages, especially multiplayer. Finally, the verdict is, a workmanlike Formula 1 game. Our N64s are capable of so much more though. Bit damning with faint praise really, innit? And they give it 71%. October 1997. Yeah, sounds about right for the time. F1 games were 10 a penny back then, and this one sounds a bit average to be honest. Still, probably a laugh with your mates after a few beers. This page from N64 Magazine looks like it's having a peek at War Gods. Remember that one? Bit of a Mortal Kombat clone really. Came out when everyone was trying to get a slice of that digitized fighting pie. This article, the most special of the special, is taking a look at some of the, well, special moves each character has in the game. They're showing off screenshots and little descriptions of these moves. Looks like they've picked one special move per character. Things like Warhead's Quake Punch, Anubis's Pyramid Containment, Voodoo's Nail Down, Tack's Rock Crush, Ahwakin's Sunburst, Valor's Dragon Trap, C5's Laser, Kabuki Joe's Fire Trap, Pagan's Skeleton Trap, and finally, Maximus's Shockwave. Reading the descriptions, they're pretty standard fighting game fare. Bit of earthquaking, summoning pyramids, raining nails, bits and bobs. Some of the descriptions are a bit cheeky, like, hurts like a good 'un for Voodoo's Nail Down, and warms his hands on their glowing flesh. Nice. For Ahwakin's Sunburst, typical games mag humor back then. They even mention the button combinations for each move so you could try them out yourself. Seems like N64 Magazine thought these were the N64's personal favorites, so they must have thought they were alright at the time. Whether they were actually that special? Whoa, that's another question, innit? This page in N64 Mag is having a right go at War Gods, isn't it? Blimey, remember that one? They're saying it's a bit pants, like a poor man's Mortal Kombat in 3D. Which, to be fair, it kind of was. They've got screenshots with little captions poking fun at the dodgy graphics and silly moves. One about a skirt and someone losing an eye, another about a tree or beehive rucksack, and then the battle of the skirts. They're not holding back, are they? Far. Looking at the breakdown boxes, visuals gets a kicking comparing it to Mortal Kombat 3D. Sounds are apparently overly serious, and the voiceover is some bloke trying to sound deep. Mastery is called criminally untroubled waste of molded plastic. Ouch. Lifespan suggests you'll be bored quick, feeling cheated after seeing all the characters' delights. And the verdict is brutal. A paragon of money for old 3D rope, giving it a score of 46%. Ouch again. That's got a sting. There's also a little box with UK and N64 controller logos, saying War Gods is out now for £60, needing 64M cartridge, 12 players, and controller, and pack a back. A steep price for a duffer by the sounds of it. Wargo. Oh, and there's a be a big guy tip on how to play as Grox, one of the bosses. Down, right, left, up, down, right, up, left. Simple as that apparently to hear too easy, and play as the fat boy. Might have been worth a go just for a laugh back in the day. Right at the side there's a sorry again box, apologizing again for not reviewing the pale version of War Gods, saying they'll let us know what the conversion is like when they get their hands on it. So even they weren't that bothered about rushing to play it then. All in all, sounds like War Gods was a bit of a stinker, even for the N64 early days. Probably best forgotten, to be honest. This page then, is from the Import Arena section of N64 Magazine, issue 7. It seems they're having a look at GoldenEye 007, which at the time was only available as a Japanese or US import, hence the little flags at the top. They're clearly pretty chuffed about it, calling it a mental recipe of the best Doom game mixed with all the things you wanted to do as James Bond, which sounds right up our street back then. They mention it's a step above all those ropey film time games, except maybe RoboCop 3 and Hudson Hawk on the Amiga, in a slightly sarcastic way. There's a picture of the game itself. Looks a bit blocky, but hey, it's the N64. They're clearly chomping at the bit to get stuck into it properly when it's finally out in the UK in November, saying they can't think of anything bad to say about it yet. Right at the bottom, in big letters, is GOLDE, which I assume is cut off from GoldenEye. And a cheesy Bond villain quote, "Ah, Mr. Bond, we've been expecting you," to finish it off. Very 90s. This page from N64 Mag looks like it's all about GoldenEye on the N64. Remember that one? Blimey, that was a game changer. They're going on about the weapons, saying you start with the Walther PP7, a decent enough sidearm, and you pick up others as you go along. Apparently the silencer is a big deal if you want to be sneaky. They're proper impressed with the sniper rifles with the telescopic sight headshots are the way to go, they reckon. Just like in Doom but with a proper scope, imagine that. Sounds a bit like they're still blown away by that idea after years of sprite-based games. It also mentions dual wielding if you grab two of the same weapon, a bit John Woo apparently. Yeah, okay. Down the side they've got a list of weapons: Walther PP7, DD44, Dostovoy. Never heard of that in real life, must be a Russian thing. Klob, KFV Soviet, ZMG 9mm, sniper rifle, phantom, and automatic shotgun, each with a little description, nothing too exciting. They're saying the game is out now in Japan, but we have to wait until November for the UK version. Typical. It's gonna cost around 45 quid, which is probably a bit steep, but hey, N64 games were always a bit pricey, weren't they? 96 meg-cart sounds massive at the time, doesn't it? Good memories, good times. This page in the magazine, it's all about GoldenEye 007, isn't it? Right in the thick of it back then, November 97. Seems like yesterday you were queuing up to get your hands on the grey cartridge. So, this page is like a little guide for the game, for those of us struggling maybe. It's got level walkthroughs for the first 9 levels, from the dam all the way to Bunker 2. They're giving you the best bit and the hardest bit for each level, which is quite handy, and even a weapon of choice. For the dam, the best bit is apparently using the sniper rifle for the first time, showing off. More like, hardest bit is navigating the underground without getting shot to bits, sounds about right. And weapon of choice is the silenced sniper rifle, naturally. Then there's facility, runway, surface, bunker, silo, frigate, another surface level, and then Bunker 2. For facility, the best bit shooting guards on the toilet, charming. Runways about driving the tank, and silos about escaping with the scientist. Each level's got a little screenshot, blurry as you like, typical for back then. On the left side there's a weapon rundown. AR-33, D5K Deutsche, RCP-90, all the classics. Grenade launcher, rocket launcher, the mines, the throwing knives, and plastique explosive too. Listing out all the toys you could play with. Remember arguing with your mates about which gun was the best? Good times. Warrincher. Essentially, it's a quick and dirty guide to get you through the early levels of GoldenEye. Perfect for when you were stuck and needed a nudge in the right direction without having to ask your older brother for help. Those were the days, eh? Simpler times, blockier graphics, but we loved it. The next page is all about GoldenEye 007 on the N64. Proper classic that. They've gone and done level tips, you see, with the best bit and hardest bit for each one. Bit standard, really. Levels like statue, archives, streets, all the usual suspects. Each level's got a little picture, and they're suggesting weapons of choice. Automatic shotgun for statue. Messy, but effective, they say. D5K Deutsche for depot. Makes sense. Then there's a bit about cheat codes, saying you get them for beating levels in certain times. Sounds a bit sweaty to me, but each to their own. Donkey/Carrot Country. What a daft name that is. Apparently it's about getting rewarded with cheats if you're good enough at the game. List some of them out: paintball mode for dam, invincibility for facility. Now, takes you back, doesn't it? So yeah, looks like a decent enough guide if you were struggling on GoldenEye, back then. Probably needed it, to be fair. Some of those levels were a right pain. This page is all about GoldenEye 007 on the N64, blimey. What a classic that was. They're calling it You Only Live Twice and For Your Lives Only, all very dramatic. Seems they're giving a guide to Mission 2, telling you to find Dr. Doak, get a security pass, and meet 006. Bit obvious really, but hey, it's a guide. They're suggesting clearing areas before moving on, and not getting caught from behind. Solid advice for any Bond wannabe. Then there's talk about the multiplayer, which everyone was raving about back then. Apparently they hadn't touched on it much before, but it's a big deal. They mention it's not just team games, but also objective-based stuff, catering for everyone. And you could play as loads of characters like Jaws, Oddjob, Baron Samedi, Mental. They reckon deathmatching might lose its appeal because you can see everyone, but who cared, it was still brilliant fun with your mates. They've got screenshots of the game showing different bits, character selection screens with Aramov, Natalia, Trevelyan, Valentin, all the usual suspects. There's a list of times to unlock levels, like Caverns at 10 minutes, Cradle at 9:30, Aztec at 2:15, Egyptian at 6 minutes, and unlocks for different modes and weapons like Cougar Magnum, Moonraker Laser, Golden Gun, and even a level editor. Mad to think about level editors on consoles back then. Warrington it. They're saying GoldenEye set a new graphics standard for Doom-style games, even better than Turok's Myst and Monsters. They mention Star Fox 64 as a comparison, saying GoldenEye is a different pace to Rare's usual stuff, but still impressive. In a section called Condiment, they go on about the graphics being amazing. Bullet holes, dust, flames, all the things that were a big deal at the time. Everything destructible from cameras to TVs. Proper next-gen stuff compared to old Doom games. They were impressed alright. They mentioned going to some show, ECTS, and playing GoldenEye on the Nintendo stand, saying it arrived at the office a week before. They preferred playing GoldenEye to all the flashy new software they saw, even comparing it to Banjo and Kazooie, Zelda and Diddy Kong Racing, saying GoldenEye was just better, satisfyingly perfect. Good times, good times. This page in the magazine is all about GoldenEye 007 on the N64, remember that? It's under the Import Arena section, so this must have been before it properly came out here, or maybe it's focusing on the PAL version which they were always banging on about back then. It's giving you a few tips on playing, like telling you to clear the lower floor, and aim for headshots. Obvious really, even back then we knew that. There's something about getting a security pass, body armor on easier modes, and taking out guards to get to the control room. Then you're supposed to find Dr. Doak in the chemical plant. Apparently he's not like other scientists, whatever that means. Probably doesn't just stand there waiting to be shot. He gives you a keycard to get to the bottling room and you meet 006 and plant mines. And you gotta use your watch to blow up the tanks before 06 gets executed. Sounds stressful. Finally, pocket your gun and escape. The magazine seems really impressed with it. They're saying Rare were fed up with dodgy PAL conversions, so they made sure this one was full screen and full speed. Apparently it's going to be the best version because PAL TVs show more detail and higher resolution, which was always the argument. They've given it top marks for visuals, sounds, mastery and lifespan, and a 94% verdict, calling it sheer, unadulterated Bond brilliance. They reckon the N64 is being used to its full potential, and it takes the Doom-style game to a whole new level, which was high praise back then. They also mention the multiplayer being superb, and the weapon choice is amazing, and we all know how good that multiplayer was. Endless hours in front of the telly with mates. They even mention the bullet sounds, Phipps and Pyang a bit much maybe, but they were excited. They're really hyping it up, saying it's the game everyone will copy and that nobody does it better. Standard magazine stuff, but we all lapped it up at the time, didn't we? This page features a look at Ganbare Goemon, Neo Momoyama Bakufu no Odori, for the N64, which they are just calling Goemon for short. It's a Japanese import of course, typical for N64 Magazine back then, Gorinta Nori. The reviewer seems a bit on the fence, saying it's quite text-heavy, which might be a pain for us Brits who can't read Japanese. But they also say it's got that heroic action vibe they like from N64 characters. There are a few screenshots showing the gameplay, looks quite colourful and quirky in that distinctly Japanese way, with some odd-looking characters. One screenshot mentions a puzzle, and clues being in the arrows, which sounds a bit cryptic. There's a little info box saying it's out now in Japan, costs 8,900 yen, and takes up 128 megs, which was quite a bit of memory back in the day. They reckon it's about £45, which isn't cheap for an import. They also moan about the camera being a bit rubbish compared to Super Mario 64, which is fair enough. That game set the bar pretty high for 3D cameras. Overall, it seems like a decent enough game, but maybe a bit too Japanese and wordy for some of us. This page in the magazine is taking a look at Ganbare Goemon, this bonkers import title for the N64. Right from the get-go they're saying it's a bit of a weird mix, platforming, RPG bits and action all chucked in together. Apparently, to get shrinking powers, you have to nick pills from a giant's cupboard, which sounds typically Japanese, doesn't it? There's a bit where you have to hide from this giant, and another bit with aliens in a sitcom-style encounter, complete with canned laughter. Very strange indeed. Then there's talk of a ghost lady boss, who throws spinning plates at you. They mention the real Goemon was like a Japanese Robin Hood back in the 16th century. Which is a bit of history for you. The reviewer seems a bit unsure what to make of it all, saying it's possibly only half finished, and while it's obviously trying to be like Super Mario 64, it's not quite as polished. They do point out the humor, and the fact it's got a real 70s anime theme tune vibe going on, and even karaoke. Sounds like a bit of a mixed bag, but might be worth a punt if you're after something a bit different and can read Japanese. Just don't go expecting Mario 64 levels of slickness, apparently. This page of Import Arena in N64 Magazine, it's all about those Japanese games we were desperate to get our hands on back in '97, proper import stuff. First off, there's a little tip for 100 views of Mount Fuji, sounds a bit cryptic. Involving a desert pool, film, and Ibisu's camera, something about taking a picture from a tree in a lake. Probably spent ages trying to figure that out, typical game secrets, eh? Then there's another tip called Spare 50p Guy, Aki, about finding a red gate, climbing sections and throwing coins into a shrine to get fiery power. Sounds like a bit of a faff, but we loved that hidden stuff back then. The reviews are headlined with food names, which is a bit odd. Dango, dumplings, is up first. They're talking about the atmosphere of the game, saying it's got that proper Edo Japan feel, which is nice, but then they mention the frame rate being a bit dodgy, which is not ideal. Apparently outside areas are good, but the level design is a bit up and down, and the camera is a bit of a pain. Controls are compared to Super Mario 64, which is high praise at the time, even if they did have their quirks. Clipping errors are mentioned, which was pretty common back then, to be fair. Next review is Onigiri, rice balls, and they say it's got a bit of everything. Fighting, talking, puzzles, shooting. They reckon the dungeon bits are like old school Zelda, which again is a good thing. Apparently it's got multi-layered areas and secret stuff, which is always welcome. They even have a dig at Mario 64 being too simple, saying this game has more depth, which is fighting talk. Then there's a bit called wasabi, green radish paste, and they're on about the game being bizarre and eccentric, saying they miss games that mess with your head, complaining that things are all a bit samey these days even back then. Finally, at the bottom there's a section called The Merry Warring/Men, introducing the characters, Goemon, Ebisumaru, and Yae. Goemon is the main man, bit of a show-off, transforming into a Dragon Ball Z type apparently. Ebisumaru is his sidekick, bit of a strange one with a blue bonnet, fighting with a mallet. And Yae, the green-haired ninja girl with a katana, sounds like the tough one, slicing enemies up proper. Yeah, those were the days, importing games and reading up on all the quirky Japanese stuff we couldn't get enough of. This page from the mag, right? It's the Import Arena section, which was always good for a gander at what the Japanese were up to on the N64. First up is Goemon Impact, and blimey, it's about a giant mech, like a proper bonkers Japanese robot thing. They're saying it's like a 70s Mobile Suit parody with dodgy pop songs and all that. Seems a bit out there, but in a good way. They mention the visuals are sumptuous locations, but with some dodgy camera work. Motion sickness ahoy apparently. Gameplay's meant to be good, but the RPG bits could be a bit of a slog, might get you stuck for hours. Cheers for the warning. Sounds are chippy but chirpy, which sounds about right for the N64, like revamped SNES tunes. Mastery's an 8 out of 10, and lifespan's a 7, and overall they've slapped an 80% on it, calling it brilliant and frustrating, and a devilish little platform/shooty/action RPG thing. So, sounds like a bit of alright if you're into that wacky Japanese stuff. Then there's a bit on Sasuke, who apparently moves strangely because he's meant to be a robot. His second weapon is bombs, which you'll need for white double doors. Sounds straightforward enough. And finally nori, or seaweed wrapping. And they're saying you missed some details from the older 16-bit days, but it's still good to see fresh ideas. All in all, typical import stuff, a bit odd, a bit different, but that was half the fun back then, wasn't it? This page features a look at Tetrisphere on the N64. Seems like they're quite impressed with it, calling it nice job. It's from Nintendo and H2O apparently, out now and costing a hefty $70, or about £45 back then. Blimey. It's 64 meg, for 1 or 2 players, and needs a pound for save games. They reckon it's a winter release, so must have been a bit later in the year. There's a how to play Tetrisphere guide, showing you how to place blocks on a sphere. Looks a bit odd. Apparently you have to match shapes and smash squares. Sounds a bit mad. Typical puzzle game, eh? Then there's a bit on 2-player mode, which seems to be a race to the core of the sphere. Exploding your mate's sphere is mentioned. Bit naughty. Georged. Overall, Tetrisphere seems to be getting a good write-up here in issue 7 of N64 Magazine, back in '97. Remember those days, eh? This page in N64 Magazine, right, it's got a review for a game called Tetrisphere. Looks a bit mental, to be honest, like Tetris but spherical, naturally. It's under the Import Arena section, so it must be one of those games that were out in the States first and we got a bit later, if at all. The review is titled, Here, in big blue letters, very subtle, and talks about how Tetrisphere will divide people, saying if you think the N64 is all about amazing graphics then you might like it, but if you're after good old entertainment then maybe not so much. They reckon it will annoy the purists who think the original Tetris is perfect as it is. Bit harsh perhaps. There's a section called Pick a Character, showing 4 of these weird robotic characters you can play as Wheels, Rocket, Gears and Turbine. Wheels is described as having a swollen eye, poor bloke, and Gears is a disturbing hammerhead shark / bunch of cogs crossbreed. Charming. Turbine apparently won the lottery, and wears a grass skirt now. These are proper odd, aren't they? Orrington Norcester. Down the side they've got these little numbered boxes giving their verdict. Visuals get 5 out of 6, saying they are bright and breezy with nice backgrounds. Sounds gets a 6. Ultra-modern techno-trance jungle light. Sounds a bit much, doesn't it? Mastery only gets a 4, saying it's not breaking any boundaries but is alright. Lifespan gets a 6, plenty to do apparently, especially 2-player mode. The overall verdict at the bottom gives it 71%, which is okay I suppose. They say it will divide opinions, those who love it and those who think the N64 can do better. They call it a budget-priced cart socket filler, which isn't exactly a glowing recommendation, is it? But they do admit the 2-player mode is good. So a bit of a mixed bag then, this Tetrisphere. Might be worth a look if you are bored and fancy something a bit different. This page from N64 Magazine's Import Arena section, issue 7, takes us right back to 1997, doesn't it? We're looking at 2 Japanese N64 games here. Gay. First up is Power League 64, and blimey the reviewer doesn't pull any punches. Says it looks alright at first glance, but apparently plays like a dog. Even for a baseball game, they reckon it's slow, the players have no faces, and hitting the ball is a lottery. Sounds like a bit of a stinker to be honest. They mention Power Pro Baseball and King of Pro Baseball as comparison points, which were probably better bets if you were after a digital baseball fix. Price was about 35 quid, apparently unlikely to see it in the UK officially though. Ball. Then there's Django Simulation Mahjong 64. Now Mahjong, that's a bit niche, isn't it? They're asking if this game can put the R back into Mahjong, which is a bit of a weird question. It's got anime characters, and they talk about Tokyo Mahjong clubs and 3D views of the tiles. Sounds like they're trying to make Mahjong more exciting, maybe with some Japanese flair. Again about 35 quid for this one, and also unlikely to grace UK shores officially. So a mixed bag from Japan then, a dodgy baseball game, and a potentially interesting Mahjong title. Typical Import Arena stuff really. This page, in the Import Arena section, seems to be having a look at a couple of games that you might have had to, well, import back in the day for your N64. First up there's Power League 64, which is a baseball game. Blimey, it sounds like a bit of a duffer from the review. They're saying it's officially licensed Japanese baseball, but that's about the only good thing. Apparently the controls are a right pain, and the whole thing's a bit tedious. Don't even see do. Think about it, is the verdict, and a measly 42% to go with it. Ouch. The screenshot shows some blokes in stripy uniforms, and it all looks a bit basic, even for 97. Then there's ISS 64 US version. Now this is more like it. It's International Superstar Soccer, but the American version. Apparently it's pretty much the same as the PL version we got, just without the screen borders. They are raving about this one, giving it 9s across the board for visuals and mastery, and an 8 for sounds. Unsurpassed visuals, and a beautiful game that plays almost perfectly, are some of the comments. The reviewer reckons it's the finest football game to date, and gives it a stonking 92%. Makes sense really, IS64 was the business back then, wasn't it? They even mention the British commentary in the PL version, which was a bit of a highlight. It was $70 apparently, which they reckon is about 45 quid. So swings and roundabouts on imports. Baseball pants might be best left on the shelf, but top quality footy is always welcome. This page in N64 Magazine is all about the Mario Kart 64 Championship, reaching its final stage, Stage 3. It seems like they've had loads of entries already, and they're sorting through the best times for Mario Raceway, aiming for around the 1 minute 4 seconds mark. Blimey, those were the days of VHS tapes. They needed video proof of your fastest laps, and the deadline was Friday, October 10th. Apparently, the top 3 racers were going to be invited to the N64 Magazine office to battle it out for a proper trophy. They even extended the deadline a bit, probably because they needed time to print the results for the next issue, and didn't want a load of angry gamers phoning up. If you were lucky enough to make the final, they'd contact you by Wednesday, October 15th. At the bottom there's a bit about shortcuts on Mario Raceway, and how to find them in issue 4, page 86, for those struggling to beat the time. Mario Kart 64, good times. All the usual suspects are there in the picture. Mario, Luigi, Peach, Yoshi, Donkey Kong, Bowser, everyone wanting a piece of the action. This page shows the Stage 2 results for a Mario Kart 64 competition. Looks like it was from back in October 1997. Right then, let's have a nosy. It seems they had all these times sent in by August, and blimey, they even needed video proof. Proper serious stuff for a bit of Mario Kart. They were saying that even if you didn't beat the top 3, you could still get into the next stage. Looks like Vincent Coyne from Salthill in Ireland was top of the pops with a time of 1 minute 2 seconds and 68 hundredths of a second. Tom Pepin and Henry Siegerman were in second and third. Then there's just pages of names and times, all trying to be the fastest on Mario Kart, folks from all over, places like Carlisle, Kent, Hull, Londonderry, all sorts. Good effort, lads. They even mention if you were wondering about without shortcut times, they'd look at them next month if enough people bothered. Cheeky! Looks like everyone was trying their best to shave off every millisecond they could. Right then, stage 3 next, let's see what that was all about. This page then, is all about the Mario Kart 64 Championship in N64 Magazine, Stage 3 no less. Seems like things are getting a bit serious if you were into your karting back then. There's a bit of drama kicking off about someone posting a time of 1 minute 2 seconds on Mario Raceway, with another reader, L. Middleton from Hull, saying it's not possible, and reckons someone might be bending the rules a bit. They even mention the official Japanese record to back up their point. Cheeky. Ed, the editor, sounds like he's taking it all in stride and is suggesting anyone who thinks they can do better, or prove the fast time is dodgy, should send in a video. It's all getting a bit competitive, bless them. There's a picture showing the dodgy 1:02 time on the telly screen, and another photo of a chap who might be Vincent, the supposed fast driver, or maybe just some randomer. Down below there's a how to enter bit explaining you've got to video record your best time in time trial mode, using the UK version of the game naturally. There's a timetable showing, stage 1 and 2 are already done and dusted, with stage 3 being the current one. The closing date for entries for this stage is Friday, October 10th, so you had to be quick if you wanted to enter. The best times get printed in N64 Magazine issue 8, and the top players get invited to the N64 office for a showdown, with a trophy up for grabs. Fancy that. Doc A. The rules are pretty straightforward: 3 laps of Mario Raceway in time trial mode, UK PAL version only, and entries must be on video. They're even giving tips on how to video record it, like using a SCART or a V-lead, making sure your telly channel is right, and winding back the tape. Proper old school video recording advice there. Kakja. Then there's a coupon to fill in if you wanted to enter, asking for your name, address and phone number, and a few checkboxes to confirm you're doing it right. You had to send your coupon and video to the magazine's address in Bath. Good times. This page is all about getting dastardly shortcuts in Mario Kart 64. Right then, so if you weren't fast enough already, apparently it's time to chuck the rulebook out the window. They're saying if your lap times are still rubbish, even though you think you're a top player, it's time to cheat. Well, I suppose they mean use unconventional methods. It's talking about how they're gonna show us the best shortcuts in Mario Kart 64. Whether they're proper shortcuts, or just glitches and bugs that you can exploit. Apparently Nintendo put them in there for the cunning players. Cheeky, I reckon. So, this article is promising to help you improve your times, even if it means bending the rules a bit. Good stuff if you want to show off to your mates, I suppose, but back then, half the fun was figuring this stuff out for yourself, wasn't it? Still, always good to get a leg up if you could. It's got Mario and Donkey Kong plastered on it, so you know who the main players are. This page is showing us some sneaky shortcuts for Mario Kart 64, classic stuff, right? We've got Luigi Raceway the Italian Bounce, which sounds a bit poncy, doesn't it? Apparently it's a tough one, 4 out of 5 difficulty, needing a mushroom, and it shaves a few seconds off your lap time. It's all about bouncing off the brick wall, classic N64 jankiness, but if you pulled it off you were king of the playground. Then there's Koopa Troopa Beach Rock Face Rabbit Hop. That one's a bit more obvious, 2 out of 5 for difficulty, no items needed even. Just a jump into a cave. Still, back in the day finding these little tricks was everything, especially for bragging rights against your mates. Lap times were all that mattered, and this page is showing you how to shave off those crucial seconds. Good times. This page from N64 Magazine takes me right back to the late 90s. It's all about Mario Kart 64 shortcuts, proper cheeky ones too, glitching and bouncing off walls. The kind of thing we all spent ages trying to master back then. First up is Frappe Snowland. They're calling it a glitch shortcut. Bit of a weird one really. Apparently you drive past the starting line, do a 180, go back over the bridge, and then Lakitu, that little cloud fella, is meant to pick you up and put you behind the line, registering a lap. Sounds a bit pointless if you ask me, and not exactly speedy, but hey, maybe someone found it amusing. They even say, not much fun, admittedly, but hey, what a lap time. Sarcasm perhaps? Then there's the cold coffee cut, on the same Frappe Snowland track. This one looks more like a proper shortcut. You're supposed to jump onto the snowy bank on the right side of the bridge, missing out a chunk of the track. Difficulty 3 out of 5 they reckon, and could shave your lap time down to 25 seconds from 45. Not bad if you can pull it off, I suppose. Flipping down to the bottom half, we've got Choco Mountain and a shortcut called Coco Cladding Clash. This one's a variation on the Italian bounce. I remember those. You have to hop your way over a wall. This one sounds trickier, a difficulty of 4 out of 5, and they say guardrails in time trial mode make it even harder. The shortcut itself looks like you're meant to turn 90 degrees to face a wall, use a mushroom, and jump just before you hit it to bounce over to the other side. Or, apparently you can try it from the top of the first bump, which they say is much harder. Lap times can be cut down to 36 seconds from 43 if you nail it. Du tao. So yeah, a whole page dedicated to Mario Kart 64 shortcuts. Typical N64 Magazine fodder back then, wasn't it? Always digging out those little tricks and glitches to impress your mates. Good times. This page from the mag is all about cheeky shortcuts in Mario Kart 64. Proper crafty stuff this is. It's got Mario Raceway showing you how to pull off Mario's mid-air miracle, which sounds a bit grand for just jumping over a wall with a mushroom, doesn't it? They're calling it insanely difficult and superhuman skill. Bit much, lads, but we all wanted to shave those precious seconds off our lap times back then, didn't we? Then there's Wario Stadium with Wario's wall whiplash. This one looks like proper wall bouncing shenanigans, promising a whole 10 seconds off your lap, which is massive in Mario Kart. They're banging on about pure speed and inertia for this one, making it sound like rocket science. Difficulty ratings are given, 5/5 for the Mario's Miracle and 4/5 for the wall whiplash, so they reckon the first one's a right pain to pull off. The screenshots are showing the steps for each shortcut, little map diagrams with red circles showing where to go. Typical stuff for these mags, showing you how to get one over on your mates. Takes me back to trying these out for hours and probably failing miserably most of the time, but when you nailed it, felt like a proper gaming god for a minute. Good times. This page is all about cheeky shortcuts in Mario Kart 64, proper sneaky stuff back in '97. We're talking about how-to guides, classic magazine filler when you wanted to get one over on your mates. Warrington Nor. First up is the Silver Spoon Splashdown on Royal Raceway. This is for Grand Prix and time trial, and you need a mushroom. Basically, after the hairpin bend you just steer into the water, mushrooming at the last minute to hopefully bounce off the wall and land further down the track. They reckon it's a 2 out of 5 difficulty, and could shave a fair bit of time off your lap. Apparently there's another even more ridiculous shortcut, where you try to hit the bank by the wiggly bit after the big jump, but they say only works once in 200 attempts, and you'd be mad to try it in a race. Sounds about right. Typical glitchy nonsense we'd spend hours trying to perfect, only to fail miserably in front of our mates. Then there's Ape Cave TARDIS on DK's Jungle Parkway, which sounds properly dodgy. Dead-eye direction required, they say. This one's time trial only, and a 5 out of 5 difficulty, so you know it's gonna be a pain. Apparently, you reverse into the cave and hit a specific point to fall through a solid wall into mad limbo, landing in a black puddle. Sounds like a proper glitch to me, exploiting some dodgy level design. Lap time is supposed to be massively improved though. They mention other ways to cheat on this track too, like going over the bridge, or turning back after the waterfall. Proper exploring, wasn't it? Good times messing about with these games, trying to find every possible way to break them. Those were the days. This page is all about finding dastardly shortcuts in Mario Kart 64, proper cheeky stuff. It's got a couple of courses detailed here, Yoshi Valley and Rainbow Road. For Yoshi Valley, it's called the Lizard Ledge Leap. They reckon you need expert timing and steering for this one. Looks like you're meant to hop it over some spiny things, like you wouldn't be trying that already. They say your lap time could go from 49 seconds to 44 seconds if you nail it, which is a decent chunk of time in a race, innit? Difficulty rating is 3 out of 5, so not too bad, should be doable after a few goes down the pub to practice. Then there's Rainbow Road, and this one's called Spaceborne Suicide. Dramatic, eh? This one needs a mushroom naturally, cause everything's easier with a mushroom. It's rated as only 2 out of 5 for difficulty, but needs great patience, so I imagine it's a bit fiddly to get right. Lap times apparently go from 2 minutes 10 seconds down to 1 minute 40 seconds, blimey. That's knocking off half the track almost. Looks like you're launching yourself off into the void. Classic Rainbow Road madness. There. And at the bottom it's asking, any more? Like they're surprised people haven't found all of them already. Cheeky sods. They want you to send in your own shortcut finds with diagrams and everything to Tips Extra, N64 Magazine. Good luck posting that letter now, eh? Remember writing letters? Madness. This page is an article, right? Typical kind of thing you'd see back in the day in N64 Magazine. It's a how-to guide, this one about successfully visit a Japanese newsagent. It's got this bloke looking a bit confused, holding a Japanese games mag, surrounded by shelves of Japanese magazines. The article is basically saying, yeah, N64 Magazine is the best, obviously, but if you're over in Japan and can't get your fix, what do you do? Apparently, this man in Tokyo, Max Everingham, is giving Will some advice for his Japanese holiday. Looking at the Japanese mags in the background, you can spot a Famitsu weekly cover, looks like it's got a robot or mech on the front. And the mag the bloke is holding is Dengeki Nintendo 64, I can see Mario on the cover there. So yeah, it's all about navigating the Japanese games magazine scene if you're stuck for something to read when you're out there and can't get your proper N64 mag. Classic 90s games mag stuff really. This page is diving into the world of Japanese Nintendo magazines, something that was a bit of a mystery back in the day. It's talking about how Japan just churns out magazines by the truckload, covering every conceivable topic, and games were no exception, especially Nintendo stuff. Apparently, there were loads of magazines dedicated to the N64 and its wonders, and they were pretty comprehensive, maybe even more so than what we were used to in Blighty. It mentions these Japanese magazines could vary in quality a bit, like ours, and often had a black and white section with reader contributions, which is a nice touch. Fami Magazine 64, or Famitsu 64 as we might have called it, had a ranking box section which sounds a bit like reader charts and sketches. Then there's a handy guide on how to spot a Nintendo magazine if you were brave enough to venture into a Japanese newsagent. Basically, if the title had characters in it like which means Nintendo, or like in Famitsu, or even just for game, you were probably onto a winner. They even mentioned Sega and PlayStation as other key words, so it wasn't just Nintendo they were covering. Just this. Looking at the example magazine covers, you've got Nintendo 64, TV Gamer, which looks a bit more general gaming, and 64 Dream. The Nintendo 64 feet one has Donkey Kong on it, looking very Donkey Kong 64-ish. And there's another one, Fami Magazine 64 feet with what looks like Gomon from Mystical Ninja, racing about in a car. It seems bizarre. The page then touches on the review system in these mags. Apparently they use loads of reviewers, write short reviews, mostly just cursory comments really, and then slap a mark out of 10 on it. And it sounds like hyped up games always scored really highly, which doesn't sound too different from some places here to be honest. The reviewer here isn't overly impressed, wondering if you should even bother buying a game based on these kinds of reviews, and suggests most people just buy what's heavily marketed anyway. Say it well, sell it well, as they say. A bit cynical, but probably right. It does feel like they are saying, Japanese game reviews are maybe not the most insightful pieces of journalism. This page features a few Japanese Nintendo 64 magazines, giving us a glimpse into what the gaming press was like over in Japan back in '97. First up we have Famimaga 64. Apparently these guys were pretty cautious when this magazine tried to get info out of them. They reckon it's got the usual news and reviews, but they don't actually grade the games, which is a bit different. They seem to have a lot of Game Boy coverage, which makes sense given the time. They've got a 4-page feature on the Game Boy Tamagotchi in this issue, which was massive back then. Everyone was obsessed with those little virtual pets. They also mentioned Pocket Love, another one of those date cartoon type games, which were a bit odd if you ask me. They reckon it's aimed at a younger audience. Next is TV Gamer, and this one isn't just about the N64, they cover movies, music, fashion, the whole shebang. It's more of a general entertainment magazine, but it still manages to squeeze in some Nintendo news. They're even showing off some idol section pictures, which the reviewer, Mr. Matsumoto, seems a bit embarrassed about, being a happily married man and all that. They've got news on the new Pocket Monsters cart for the Game Boy. It's got TV listings too, so it's trying to be a bit of everything it seems. Warrant. Lastly, we have Dengeki Nintendo 64, which is apparently a newcomer. They seem to go straight into game articles without much preamble, unlike some of the British and American mags which were all about gossip and news first. They give very detailed reviews and strategy guides, which is always handy. They're obsessed with manga it seems, with cartoon strips in every issue, including one with Dengeki Yama, a sumo wrestler character, from one of the games. One of the interesting bits is, they have box outs with comments from the developers, which is a nice touch, makes you feel a bit more involved like you're getting the inside scoop. Sections in this mag are things like, Dengeki Shangri-La, N64 Next Stage, and News 64 Clip. Sounds like they are covering all the bases. The next page here is from an old N64 mag it seems, looking back at what was going on at the time, October '97 it says at the bottom. Right at the top there they've got a bit about scoop screenshots of Rare's Conker's Quest, which is interesting. It says it's on the front of the magazine. Takahashi-san from Famimaga 64 seems pretty confident about their position in the charts, even if he's not spilling the beans on copy sales. They reckon they've got a good balance between news and other Nintendo stuff. Game Boy coverage is mentioned as a distinctive feature. Then there's a bit about GoldenEye 007, and more previews of Zelda 64 and Mother 3, which were the games everyone was buzzing about back then, weren't they? They mention a 4-page interview with someone from Param who made Aquanaut's Holiday on the PlayStation, now doing their N64 debut game. Sounds like a fairly standard preview piece, nothing too insightful. Oh, and they are also talking about countdown icons, to show how long you're waiting for games. A bit of a gimmick, really. Down in the Editor Speaks bits, Takahashi-san reckons Wave Race is the game they are playing all the time and that developers are very competitive. Matsumoto-san says they sold 100,000 copies. Their audience is university and high school students and young businessmen. They like idol posters. That's a bit odd for a gaming mag, isn't it? Star Fox 64 is his game of choice and he thinks UK games have limited appeal for Japanese gamers, and reckons the N64 is floundering in Japan for the moment. Finally, Muramatsu-san, he won't say how many copies they sold, cheeky sod. Audience is no comment. Best feature is feature articles. He's playing Mario Kart 64, and reckons the best games are on the N64, naming Zelda and Mother 3. Fair enough, everyone was waiting for those two back then. The Hot Game Preview section sounds like they've got rated reviews, 4 experts giving their opinions, and they don't pull any punches. Looks like Messrs. Mita and Nakazato are going to trash new Mahjong games from Imagineer and Video System, so someone is getting a kicking there. They also mention True Manga Otaku being catered for with bunny girl pictures, and reckon it's good value for money. Shangri-La Readers section is another distinctive feature apparently. So a fairly standard mag page from back then really. A bit of everything, previews, editor opinions, a few game screenshots, and a bit of manga thrown in for good measure. This page from N64 Magazine takes a look at the Japanese mag called 64 Dream. Blimey, £1.95 a month, that's not bad even then. They reckon it's a bit of a heavyweight at 164 pages, most of it in colour too, fancy that. Apparently you get stickers of N64 characters, Goyamon's getting a shout out, and even stickers of the cars from MRC, which is nice for pimping up your carts, innit? Inside it's got your usual game charts and strategy guides, plus reader stuff. They even have a black and white bit with modification instructions. This month they're showing you how to stick Batman wings on your N64 controller, bit naff, but kids would probably love it. Good to see they're giving tips on playing imported US games, that was always a bit of a faff, the old cart slot differences. Because it's so chunky, they say it's packed with news, previews and interviews, including proper chats with game developers and even Q&A sessions answering reader questions, which sounds alright. They even mention something called Bistro de 64, which sounds a bit random, but they reckon it's still game related somehow. Apparently the top features are the cart stickers and game charts. There's a section on character goodies, with Yoshi and Kirby merch, cute enough. Looking at the screenshots, there's Conker's Quest, what became Conker's Bad Fur Day later on I reckon, and some Gomon bits too. Oh, and Bistro de 64 feet is there as well, looks like they're cooking up some game-themed grub. And a cartoon called Game 64, looks a bit madcap. Yeah, a pretty typical import mag then, bit of everything for the N64 nutter. This page from the N64 magazine is all about getting help with your Nintendo games. It's called the Nintendo Hotline. Back in the day before the internet was in every home, if you were stuck on a game you actually had to phone someone. Imagine that. They're saying if you've got a gaming problem, or your phone's been cut off because of too many calls, you can write to them instead, and they'll print the best stuff in the mag. Warrants. Then there's a bit about how hot and sticky it is in the office, bless them, and how they're playing Doom 64 in the dark with the volume up. Sounds about right for the time, doesn't it? They're giving tips for Doom 64, specifically on how to get the laser weapon, which they reckon is the most powerful weapon in the game. You need special switch keys for it, and they're found in levels 29, 30 and 31 Outpost Omega, the Lair and in the Void. Apparently these are secret levels, and they tell you how to get to level 29 from level 4, the holding area, involving switches and teleporters. Typical Doom secrets really. They also mention the special switch keys are needed in level 28, which is Absolution, the final level with Mother Demon, to make the boss battle easier. The keys look like bull skulls. They are giving directions for the secret levels, which are levels 4, 12 and 18. They are saying if you miss a key, you have to go back to an old save. A bit of a pain if you forgot to save. All in all, it's your classic tips page for Doom 64, helping you out if you're stuck, or just want to find all the secrets. Standard stuff for a gaming mag back then. The next page here is from the Tips Extra section. It's like the Nintendo Hotline back in the day, Remember calling those premium rate numbers hoping to get past a tricky bit? This one's focused on Turok 2, I reckon. Looking at the screenshots and talk about the lair and the void. They're giving you the lowdown on how to get through some levels, like level 12 Altar of Pain and level 18 Spawned Fear, guiding you to the lair and the void. Looks like they are also walking you through finding special keys, number 1, 2 and 3, in different levels. Key number 1 is apparently on a secret level, number 2 in level 30 the lair, and number 3 in level 31 the void. It's all step-by-step stuff. Go here, turn there, shoot this switch. You know the drill for these sorts of guides? Nice. Then there's a features menu code. AKE, TJL, BD, FWBFGVJVVVB. They say it's a cheat option you can't save, so every time you turn the N64 off you have to put it in again. Very 90s. Under that they've got Warp to Level, Invulnerable, which sadly doesn't work on level 32, Hectic, Health Boost, Weapons, and Map Everything cheats. Press A or B to turn them on or off, simple as that. Good for messing around once you've finished the game properly, I suppose. Memories of cheat codes scribbled down in notebooks. October 1997, yeah, Turok 2 was a big deal then. Massive game on the N64. Probably needed all the help you could get with those dinosaurs and alien blighters. This page in N64 Mag is all about tips and cheats, like they used to be back in the day. Right at the top it's got Tetrisphere, remember that one? Nintendo game, bit of a puzzler. Apparently you could put in names at the new name screen for cheats. Credits for credits, naturally, and lines for a hidden game. There's a bonkers code for all levels using symbols like a Saturn and skull and all sorts, and another one for new tunes using a weird alien head symbol. Those were the days, weren't they? Scribbling down mad symbols from magazines. Then there's GoldenEye, of course. Everyone was playing GoldenEye back then. They're on about scientists with guns in secret agent mode, which sounds a bit daft really, but could be fun for a laugh. Apparently if you don't kill them they pull out ammo. Also, if you completed it on agent mode, you got a load of new multiplayer characters. They list a whole bunch: Oddjob, Mayday, Jaws, all the usual suspects from the film, plus loads of guards and commandos and that. 33 characters in total, blimey. The classic tip is Blast Core, which was pretty new then. Turbo start in that, just like Mario Kart, and the Z button trick to get out of buildings or blow stuff up, which sounds a bit destructive for a game about clearing up after explosions, but there you go. Apparently good for Oyster Harbour and beaten tracks if you're going for platinum times. Down at the bottom there's a Your Top Tip bit, asking for your own tips and promising a flash N64 pin badge if they print it. And a bit extra special if you get number 1 tip, whatever that is. Don't send in stuff they've already printed though, apparently James gets cross. Fair enough. There's a form to fill in to send your tips off, with address and postcode for N64 Magazine in Bath. So yeah, classic tips page really. Bits for Tetrisphere, GoldenEye, and Blast Core, plus a chance to get your own tip printed and win a badge. Standard stuff for the time. This page from N64 Magazine, right? It's the reader's top 10 tips page. Always a bit of a giggle to see what folks had sent in. Blimey, some of these are proper retro gold now. Right at the top there's a Mario Kart 64 tip about getting a turbo start and bumping other racers. A classic bit of karting mischief. Then we've got a Pilot Wing 64 one, using the gyrocopter to clip the ground for a speed boost. Cheeky. ISS 64, that's International Superstar Soccer 64 for the young'uns, has a tip about rigging the teams to play against weaker opponents. Very sporting. Then there's a Super Mario 64 tip for Tall Mountain. Getting a star in under 20 seconds by sliding down the mountain. Sounds like a proper speedrunning tactic before speedrunning was even a thing really. Another Mario Kart 64 one next, this time on Moo Moo Farm, jumping over fences with the Gophers. That track was always a bit bonkers, wasn't it? Waka. Star Fox 64 gets a mention. Apparently if you complete it a second time with medals you get a new title screen, and can use the tank or your wingmen with guns. Who knew? Shadows of the Empire, the Star Wars game. There's a tip about transferring game secrets between difficulty levels, something about challenge points, and the Lebo scanner. Sounds a bit convoluted to be honest. And then another Mario Kart 64 tip, about using bigger characters in battle mode to pop smaller ones. Bit brutal. Coinstra. Finally, there's a FIFA 64 tip, and it's a belter. Just smash the cartridge with a hammer. Apparently it's more fun than playing the game. Bit extreme lads, but each to their own. Contributors to this page are names like Daniel Jones, Robert McMahon, Daniel Glenfield, David Burke, Mark Durant, Mark DuPont, and Shannon Keefe, sending in their wisdom from places like Northants, London, Abingdon, Dagenham, Guernsey, and even as far as Australia. Looking at the screenshots we've got Mario Kart 64 with the racers lined up, Pilot Wings with the gyrocopter skimming the ground, ISS 64 with the football pitch in view, Super Mario 64 sliding down a red slope, and Mario Kart again with a car flying over a fence on Moo Moo Farm, Star Fox 64 with a picture of Fox McCloud looking very determined, and Shadows of the Empire showing Dash Rendar in action. Classic N64 era stuff, brings back memories. Good times. This page in N64 Magazine, it's all about proving you're the best gamer around, isn't it? Seems they were absolutely inundated with folks showing off their Luigi Raceway times in Mario Kart 64. Good grief. So they're moving on to a new challenge now, something on Koopa Troopa Beach. If you reckon you're a dab hand at that, you could apparently win some sort of SharkPad Pro thingy from Interact. Remember them? Shoots. There's a star performance bit, and it's giving away a tip for Luigi Raceway still, about a shortcut involving mushrooms and brick walls. Sounds a bit fiddly, but I suppose that's the sort of thing you'd be trying back then to shave off those precious seconds. Isty. Then we've got the high score tables. Super Mario 64, Wave Race 64, and even Dolphin Park Stunt Mode are featured. For Mario 64, it's Foot Race with Koopa the Quick and Peach Slide, and they've split them into American/Japanese and PAL versions, which was always a bit of a faff back then. Loads of names listed with their times and locations, looks like blokes from all over like Darlington, Manchester, and even Texas and Belfast are showing off. Wave Race 64 is Sunny Beach, again split by region, with names like William Lamb from Bristol topping the board. And Dolphin Park, well that's just pure points. Nicky Stamford from Northern Ireland is apparently the stunt king there. Good on them. Those were the days, eh? Trying to get your name in the mag, proper bragging rights. This page is the letters section, Club 64, where readers get to have their say. Someone called Leo from Birmingham is on about a picture of Martian hills in a previous issue. Reckon they got the wrong hill enlarged or something. Apparently Will had to miss out on his Mahjong games as punishment. They've put the right picture in this time with Mario on Mars, proper job. Then there's a bloke moaning about Gambare Gomon 5 not being out over here. Says he nearly screamed when he read about it. Bit dramatic, mate. He's on about the size of the cartridge, 128 meg, saying Turok was that big, and even Zelda 64 is supposed to be. Thinks Konami and Nintendo are having a Barney about it, and why it's not getting released here. An American reader, Max from Texas, was proper impressed with the N64 coverage in the mag. He was astonished, apparently, in a bookstore. He's wondering about a US version of the magazine. Bless him. Ed, the editor, says they'd love to publish in the US. James has packed his bags and Tim's practicing his Kabuki Joe voice. Whatever that is. But the corporate bigwigs have said no, money's too tight. Stay in Britain, they said. Bah, says Ed. Next, someone's complaining about the clicking sound their analog sticks make on their N64 controller. Says it's annoying. Well, they do click, don't they? Suppose if it bothers you, it bothers you. May. Finally, Nino from Norway has written in. Seems like a good lad. He sent presents to Jonathan Davies and his N64 mates. He wants a copy of issue 1 as he missed it. They've got 64 copies of issue 1 lurking in the warehouse. Lucky sod. One's on its way to him. He even sent pictures of himself and his mates playing Super Mario 64. And get this, Shigs in America is wearing a Star Fox tie. Someone at the mag thought only Shigs was allowed to wear them. Apparently they've all got Star Fox ties now, even Ed, wearing his in Bath. Madness. This page in N64 Magazine, right, it's all about readers' letters and some game ideas folks have sent in. Kicking off with the letters, seems like Guy in Swindon is having grief with his Mario Kart 64 controller. Pads are playing up. Ed, the editor, reckons it's a dodgy batch and to ring Nintendo. Then there's Lee Riley, bit of a saga this one, about an elder sister and a Mario Kart competition. Sounds like sibling rivalry and some shop assistant drama, all because he wanted to win an N64, naturally. He eventually clocked a good time after reading the magazine, so at least something good came of it. We get some faces of readers as well, under headings like Barely Ever, which is a bit cheeky from the mag about showing reader faces. Then a bit of back and forth about what Bowser says in Mario. Turns out it's so longer Bowser, not so long me Bowser. Who knew the editor was such a language expert? Bit sarcastic, aren't we, Ed? Someone called David is chuffed to be clever, and at Judd Grammar School, good for him. And there's a quick mention of a road in Ireland called the N64, and someone desperately wanting a pin badge, who gets shut down sharpish by Ed. Down below, under Dream On, readers have sent in their game ideas. Cathal's got a Sherlock Holmes game idea, Sherlock Holmes and the Hound of Hell. Sounds like a proper adventure game, bit like those old LucasArts point and clicks but on the N64. He's even drawn a box art mock-up, bless him. Ho Kim Ying fancies a Tour de France game on exercise bikes, streaming video stages, very ambitious for 97, in it. And finally, Paul wants a super advanced populous game, starting from scratch with Adam and Eve. Sounds a bit like Powermonger, that old PC game which Ed also points out. Dream on indeed, some interesting ideas there though, makes you wonder what happened to them all. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 7, looks like the letters page. It's called, "So Tell Me This," and "You're a troubled bunch it would seem, so we'll answer your questions as best we can." Right then, let's see what's troubling folks back in '97. First up, someone's asking about steering wheels for Super Mario Kart 64. Remember those plastic things? Apparently the Interact one is better than using the standard controller, especially for proper racing games like Multi-Racing Championship and F1 Pole Position. Then there's the classic "Will Super Mario RPG 2 be better than Zelda?" question. Of course there's no answer as it's still ages away and shrouded in mystery. And will Super Mario 2 be two-player? Ditto, says Ed, so no news there either. Someone else is asking about the mystery panel on the bottom of the N64, and yes, that's for the 64DD, as everyone suspected. Next, someone's wondering if GamesMaster is coming back with Dominic Diamond, who apparently did his last series. They want to know which is better, Bad Influence or GamesMaster. The mag prefers Bad Influence. Moving on, there are the usual questions about release dates. Star Fox 64 is coming out in October with the Rumble Pack, and yes, it's going to be called Lilac Wars in Europe, which we all knew was a bit daft because of Star Wars. They're teasing release dates for Yoshi's Island 64 and Legend of Zelda 64 for early next year. Typical. 64D games should be cheaper than normal N64 games, which is something at least. Menuzur. Someone's asking about playing old SNES and NES games on the N64, like with an adapter, or the Hornby Superdeck thing they were banging on about. Apparently the N64 is powerful enough to emulate the SNES, but it's not really worth it. Just get a Super Game Boy if you must play Game Boy games. And finally in this section, Ultra Donkey Kong is mentioned. Apparently it's been listed in Japan, but they need to get more info from Rare. But in the meantime, there's Diddy Kong Racing. Moving on, there's a bit called About 7. Some bloke called Dave Mole is pondering 8-player Mario Kart 64, and thinks about a multi-TV adapter for the N64 like the disastrous PlayStation link-up. Ed reckons it's technically possible but not practical, as the N64 is already pushing it graphics-wise for split screen. Technology, eh, he says. Lastly, there's a section called Hammer the Loser, where Ben Barden is talking about Mario Kart 64's battle mode. He's a bit disappointed, thinks the racing is fun, but the battle levels are mixed. He mentions Big Donut, Block Fort, Double Deck, Skyscraper, and Beach, giving his opinions on each. Ed chips in with some tips for Rainbow Road shortcuts and battle mode tactics. There are a couple of screenshots too, one of Mario Kart 64 battle mode, with Yoshi and Donkey Kong in the Big Donut level, and another of Star Fox 64. All in all, just your typical letters page really, full of questions and magazine banter. This page of the magazine is a look at reader inventions, and the usual game adverts you'd expect back then. Right at the top there's an invention corner, looks like they're asking readers for their hardware ideas for the N64. Stuart Bowker from Woking has sent in a picture of his homemade N64 game storage unit, a bit Blue Peterish if you ask me, but fair play to him for getting stuck in. Yeah, then there are some ideas overload reader suggestions, like a printer to print screenshots from your N64, a 3D headset, even tiny speakers for surround sound, which is a bit ambitious for the time, isn't it? Someone's even suggested a special golf game with a sensor and a golf club handle, which is a bit wacky. Ed, whoever he is, comments on these ideas, a bit sarcastically at times, saying some of them are a bit like things you'd see in Innovations, which is a bit of a dig. Below that, it's all adverts for games and bits and bobs. There are big sections for Nintendo 64 titles, Killer Instinct Gold, Super Mario 64, and Turok Dinosaur Hunter, all with prices. You've got screenshots from Mario Kart 64, Killer Instinct Gold, Super Mario 64, and Turok to tempt you. Killer Instinct Gold and Turok were always showing off their fancy graphics back then, weren't they? Looking at the game titles, you can see games like Banjo-Kazooie, Conker's Quest, Doom 64, GoldenEye 007, Legend of Zelda 64, Mario Kart 64, Pilotwings 64, Quake 64, Shadows of the Empire, Super Mario 64, Turok and Wave Race 64. It's a good snapshot of what was hot on the N64 at the time. There's also hardware and accessories, and joypads and accessories sections, with all sorts of memory cards, controllers and bits and bobs, even carry cases and steering wheels. Seems like Software First were trying to flog you everything you could possibly need for your N64. At the bottom there's the usual small print about prices including VAT, and contact details for Software First, with a phone number starting 01268, must be based somewhere like Essex or thereabouts, and a little plug for their Club First discount scheme. Standard stuff for a games mag back then really. This page from N64 Magazine is tackling the age-old question. So, How do games actually work? They're right, it was a head-scratcher back then when you popped a cartridge into the N64 and suddenly had these amazing 3D worlds. The article starts by talking about all the fancy bits in the N64, the 64-bit processor running at 93.75 MHz, and this reality coprocessor at 62.5 MHz just for the graphics, which was proper future tech at the time. They mention anti-aliasing and digital sound too, all the things that made the N64 feel like a real step up. The writer wonders about what's actually on the cartridge and how games get made, not just some magical process. They even mention chatting to folks at DMA Design, which was a big name at the time. They were based in Silicon Valley no less. And there's a bit of a throwback to Amstrad PCs and printing cheeky messages on screen, showing how far things have come. Sounds like they're gonna try and explain some of the secrets of game development without getting too bogged down in the techie stuff, which is probably for the best for most of us. They're promising to keep it interesting anyway, and suggest getting a drink and some biscuits ready for a good read. This page delves into the fascinating world of how they actually make the games look so snazzy on the N64. It's all about graphics creation, and it seems even though the N64 is a powerhouse, it doesn't just magically conjure up those worlds. Apparently the boffins use incredibly powerful silicon graphics machines, the sort of kit that makes movie special effects, like in Jurassic Park and The Mask, to design the graphics. They use software called Alias to model everything in 3D, and then good old-fashioned pixel painting with programs like Adobe Photoshop and DPaint still plays a part for textures and backgrounds. It's quite interesting to think they're using these mega expensive workstations to create the visuals and then somehow cramming it all onto a little cartridge for our humble N64. It mentions they have their own game editing software too, for tweaking landscapes and such, all to get the games looking just right before we get our hands on them. It's a peek behind the curtain at how the digital sausages are made, so to speak. This page is all about some of the special graphics features of the N64, trying to make it sound a bit more impressive than it actually is if you ask me. They're talking about anti-aliasing and mip mapping, making out they're these super complex mysterious things. Basically, anti-aliasing is just smoothing out the jagged edges on graphics, you know, when things look blocky, especially on diagonals. They even show a little example of what nasty pixelation looks like. It's nothing new really. PC games have been doing this for ages, but they're acting like the N64 is some kind of wizard for doing it in hardware, meaning it doesn't slow the game down as much. Then they go on about mip mapping, which is another fancy term. Turns out it's about textures looking blurry when they're far away. They say it's like when you see moire patterns on telly, when someone wears stripes. Clever stuff. And the N64 stores different versions of textures so they look alright close up or far away. They've got a picture of Goemon from Mystical Ninja starring Goemon to illustrate this, so you can see how the textures are clearer closer up. They mention DMA, working at Silicon Valley, and using 32x32 down to 1x1 textures. A bit techie for your average gamer, but they try to make it sound like a big deal. Geeky. The article ends by saying that all these things aren't really groundbreaking, PCs have been doing it, but the N64 does it all in hardware with its reality coprocessor, meaning the games should run smoother. They're painting it as a big win for game designers, making their lives easier so they can just tell the machine what to do. It's all a bit of marketing spiel, but back then you could see why they were making a fuss about it. This page is having a chat about the music and sound effects in N64 games. It starts off pondering where it all comes from without CDs and tape players like we were used to. It's a bit of an explanation of digital sound really, talking about sampling and turning sound waves into numbers and all that jazz. They use Turok as an example of a game with intense sound, bit strong to say it assaults your ears maybe, but it was definitely a noisy game. They mention MIDI and synthesizers, which is how the N64 makes its noises, explaining how sound designers use PC software like SoundForge, and even nick sound effects from movie companies like 20th Century Fox and Hanna-Barbera. Imagine that. Apparently the N64 is even capable of making music that changes depending on how you play dynamically and all that, but they reckon it wasn't really used much back then. It's a bit of a dive into the tech side of things, but it's actually quite interesting to see how they got all those game sounds going on the N64 in the first place. This page dives into the nitty-gritty of how these N64 games actually get made, right? It's all about the coding side of things, getting all the fancy graphics and sounds working together as an actual game you can play. They start off with a bit of history, talking about Ada Byron Lovelace, who apparently wrote the first computer program way back in the day, even before proper computers existed, which is a bit mad when you think about it. Then it gets onto programming languages, how it all went from machine code, which sounds like proper headache stuff, to assembly language, And then these high-level languages like Fortran, COBOL, and Algol. Apparently, Pascal was a bit of a joke language for engineering students, which is a bit harsh. The article then focuses on C, which they say is the language of choice for N64 games because it's fast. They even show a bit of C code, something about what happens when your player dies in a game. Looks a bit complicated with all the curly brackets and stuff, but I suppose that's what those programmer chaps are for. They say it's all written in Silicon Valley, which sounds about right. All that tech wizardry comes from over there, doesn't it? It's good they put comments in the code though, otherwise you'd be completely lost trying to figure it out. They reckon if you can't understand it, they're not doing their job properly. Fair enough, I suppose. This page is all about building worlds for the N64, not literally with bricks and mortar, more like the digital kind. It talks about how, even with all the whizzy computers and software, designing game levels still starts with good old pencil and paper. Apparently, at Rare, they're designing levels in a sleepy corner, probably with chaps like Greg Mayles or someone from the Stamper Bros stable, sketching away on paper. They reckon if a level doesn't work on paper, it won't work in the game, which makes a lot of sense really, saves a bunch of time debugging later on. They mention a program called SVEN, described as a Norwegian timber laminator, which is a bit of a laugh, but it's actually a game editing program that runs on Silicon Graphics computers, those fancy workstations that cost a bomb back then. SVEN lets them build landscapes, place objects, and set up the baddies. Once they've done that, they can bung the level into an N64 emulator to test it out. Sounds like a pretty slick setup, meaning they can tweak things in SVEN without having to wade through loads of code, which is always a bonus. The article touches on how making N64 games is a big and expensive operation, a far cry from the days when some spotty kid with a Spectrum could knock out a bestseller. It mentions that you need TOTU Pen Silicon Graphics Kit, N64 emulation software, 3D modeling programs, sound tools, and a team of designers, musicians, and programmers. It's a serious business. They are hoping that the big companies with resources, like DMA Design and Rare, will be the ones making the best N64 games, rather than just people chasing fancy graphics. Which, looking back, is probably a fair point. Some of the best games are about more than just pretty pictures. This page of N64 Magazine is teasing issue 8, right? Looks like Lilac Wars, which we all know is Star Fox 64 now, is the big one. They're saying it's still the same game underneath, a shoot-'em-up, but with all the bells and whistles of the N64. They reckon it's gonna rip Lilac Wars to bits and show you how to become an expert. Fair enough. Oh, foray. Then there's Top Gear Rally vs Multi-Racing Championship. They've got a couple of screen grabs, looks like your typical racer of the time, bit blocky but colourful. They say it's jolly good and super smooth, best handling they've seen. We'll see about that, won't we? They are looking forward to pitting it against Ocean's Offering, whatever that is. Import Arena section is banging on about Bomberman 64. Well, everyone was waiting for that, weren't they? They'll elbow their way through queues to grab a copy apparently. Lamborghini 64 is mentioned as well, bit of a traffic jam next issue they say. Must mean it's busy. And J-League Dynamite Soccer. For the footy fans, they reckon it's a rival to Perfect Striker, and we'll have a review next month. There's a how-to section on doing all the hard bits in Blastcore. Never could get the hang of that game properly. Over on the right there's an index to issue 7, just listing what was in the last mag. Aero Gauge Preview, Englishman in Tokyo, Ask Fusoya, Blastcore Stuff, Diddy Kong Racing, Doom 64, GoldenEye Review. Warranted the usual mix of previews and reviews. Seems like issue 7 was a packed one too. A new bit section is about readers sending in their favourite N64 game and why they like it, for a prize. Daniel Glenfield and Nathan Oliver are mentioned as previous winners who wrote about Mario Kart 64, so fair play to them. Kara, moreover, just says there'll be more news and pictures from ECTS and the Tokyo Game Show, and loads of tips and features. Standard magazine filler really. Issue 8 is out Monday 13th of October. Mark it in your diary, eh? This page is a cover of the N64 Magazine October 1997 issue. Blimey, that's a while back, isn't it? Right then, front and center we have pole position 64, big yellow and red letters, can't miss it. It's got the Formula 1 branding, so you knew it was trying to be the proper racing sim on the N64. They're going on about it being the most authentic Formula 1 game ever. Bit of a claim there. Even back then, it's got 16 tracks from the 96 season, 22 racing cars and 30 drivers. Must have been quite something at the time. Down the side in that bright red strip, we've got the reviews this issue section. Doom 64, yeah, that was pretty dark and moody for the N64, not your usual colourful fare. F1 pole position, naturally, they're pushing their main game. War Gods, can't say I remember that one too well, probably a bit of a clunker. And GoldenEye 007, now that was the game everyone was raving about. Changed console shooters forever, that did. There's a little picture for GoldenEye, looks like Bond in some level. Classic stuff. B. Then, under other stuff, there's a random bunch of bits and bobs. Gambar Gomon. Not sure many of us Brits knew what to make of that Japanese stuff back then. Tetrisphere. A bit of a weird 3D Tetris spin-off. Power League Baseball. Probably aimed more at the US market. International Superstar Soccer 64. Or ISS 64 as we called it, good footy game that was. Then some random tip sections, how to take dastardly shortcuts in Mario Kart 64, always useful, how to successfully visit a Japanese newsagent, bit niche that one, and loads of tips, generic enough. There's more game mentions further down, Mario Kart 64 Championship Stage 3, some kind of competition I guess, Yoshi's Story, cute platformer that Diddy Kong Racing, another racer, N64 was Racer Central wasn't it, Lamborghini 64, another car game, an ECTS report, probably something about a games show, and how games work, sounds a bit basic. Overall yeah, typical N64 mag from back then, bit of everything, focusing on the big hitters and trying to cover all bases. Seems like a decent issue, especially if you were into your racing games, or wanted to know more about GoldenEye.